I'm too old for you, she whispered as bullets tore through the Arizona desert air. The young cowboy pulled her closer, his storm-gray eyes never leaving hers even as death circled them like vultures. Then let me be young enough for both of us. This is the story of Charlotte Whitmore and Jack Calder, a love born in gunfire, tested by scandal, and proven in the unforgiving West. Stay with me until the end, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The stagecoach lurched violently as another bullet splintered through the wooden frame, sending splinters flying like deadly rain. Charlotte Whitmore pressed herself flat against the overturned luggage, her fine Boston dress already torn and dusty, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribcage. The screams of the other passengers had died down to whimpers now, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic tang of blood in the desert air. "Stay down!" the driver had shouted just moments before the bullet found him, before he'd tumbled from his perch like a rag doll, before everything had gone to absolute hell. Charlotte's fingers trembled as she clutched her small travel bag, the only possession she'd managed to grab when the outlaws first appeared on the ridge. Inside were letters from the Tucson school board, a daguerreotype of her mother, and the last remnants of a life she'd fled 3,000 miles to escape. None of it would matter if she died here, in this godforsaken stretch of Arizona territory, her blood soaking into sand that had probably claimed 100 other forgotten souls. The shooting had stopped. That was somehow worse than the noise. Charlotte held her breath, listening to the terrible silence broken only by the nervous shuffling of the horses still trapped in their traces. Through a gap in the shattered coach, she could see the vast emptiness of the desert stretching in every direction, sagebrush and red rock and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. No help. No salvation. Just her and whoever was coming around that coach to finish what they'd started. She heard boots crunching on gravel, slow, deliberate, the walk of men who knew they'd already won. "Check inside," a rough voice growled. "Stages from Phoenix always carry payroll." Charlotte's breath caught. She pressed deeper into her hiding spot, knowing it was useless, knowing they'd find her in seconds. Her mind raced through options: scream, run, beg, fight, but her body remained frozen, every muscle locked in primal terror. The coach door creaked open. A shadow fell across her hiding place. "Well, well," the man said, his voice thick with cruel amusement. "Looks like we got ourselves a bonus, boys. A pretty little—" The crack of a rifle shot split the air. The outlaw's words died in his throat as he stumbled backward, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. Charlotte heard shouts of confusion, more gunfire, and then the thunder of hooves approaching fast. So fast the ground itself seemed to shake. "Riders, take cover!" The outlaws scattered like roaches from candlelight. Charlotte stayed frozen, unable to process what was happening, unable to do anything but press her hands over her ears as the world exploded into chaos once again. But this chaos was different. This wasn't the methodical violence of men picking off defenseless prey. This was fury unleashed, rapid gunfire, shouted warnings, the sounds of a real fight. Through the gap in the coach, she glimpsed him. A rider on a paint horse, moving like he'd been born in the saddle, his hat pulled low and a rifle in his hands that he wielded with devastating precision. He couldn't have been more than 25, but he rode with the confidence of someone who'd faced death so many times they'd become old friends. Another shot. Another outlaw down. The young rider wheeled his horse around, scanning for threats with eyes that even from a distance seemed to glow with an almost supernatural intensity. The remaining outlaws broke and ran. Charlotte watched them flee into the maze of rock formations to the south, their courage evaporating the moment they'd face someone who could actually shoot back. The young cowboy didn't pursue. Instead, he holstered his rifle and turned his horse toward the destroyed stagecoach, his posture shifting from warrior to something gentler. "Anyone alive in there?" His voice carried clear and strong across the desert silence, a young voice, but steady, unshaken. Charlotte tried to answer, but her throat had gone completely dry. She managed a sound somewhere between a cough and a whimper, pathetic even to her own ears. The coach door swung fully open, flooding her hiding spot with harsh afternoon light. She squinted up and found herself looking into the most remarkable eyes she'd ever seen. gray like a storm rolling in from the ocean, framed by sun-weathered skin and the kind of face that belonged on ancient Greek statues in the museums she used to visit back home. Young, yes, but carved by hardship into something striking and undeniably handsome. "Ma'am?" He extended a hand, leather glove worn soft with use. "You hurt?" Charlotte stared at that hand for a moment, her mind still catching up to the fact that she was alive, that rescue had come from nowhere, that this stranger had just saved her life. She reached up and took it, and the moment their fingers connected, she felt something shift in the universe. A click, like a lock tumbling into place. He pulled her from the wreckage with surprising gentleness, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. Up close, she could see he was even younger than she'd thought, probably not even 25, with the lean build of someone who'd grown up working hard and eating light. A boy, really, despite the capabilities she'd just witnessed. And she was 35 years old, a disgraced schoolteacher fleeing scandal, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that no amount of cold cream could erase. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. I know what they were going to do." His jaw tightened, anger flashing briefly in those gray eyes. "They're gone now. Won't be back, not today at least." Charlotte became aware of other sounds, moans from around the coach, other passengers, other survivors. The young cowboy released her hand and moved to help them. There was an elderly couple huddled together, both shaking but unharmed. A traveling salesman with a gash on his forehead, bleeding but conscious. And the driver, who Charlotte had been certain was dead, stirring weakly in the dust. "Jackson," the cowboy called out, and another rider appeared from behind the rocks, older, grizzled, with the look of someone who'd seen the elephant and then some. "Help me get these folks sorted. Driver's alive, but he's in bad shape." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Charlotte found herself sitting on a flat rock, watching the two cowboys work with practiced efficiency. They staunched the driver's bleeding, checked the other passengers for injuries, and gathered up what belongings hadn't been scattered or shot to pieces. The young one, the one who'd pulled her from the wreckage, moved with a grace that seemed almost out of place in such a brutal landscape. "Water, ma'am?" Charlotte looked up to find him offering her a canteen. She took it gratefully, the liquid cool and precious against her parched throat. "I'm Charlotte," she said, not knowing why she felt compelled to introduce herself, why it suddenly seemed important that the stranger know her name. "Charlotte Whitmore." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly it made something in her chest ache. "Jack Calder, ma'am. That's Jackson over there. He works the same ranch I do. We were heading back from Phoenix when we heard the shooting." "You saved our lives, Mr. Calder." Something flickered across his face, not pride, but perhaps a kind of sad acknowledgement, as if saving lives was a duty he'd grown accustomed to. Just happened to be in the right place. "Or the wrong place, depending on how you look at it," Jackson called over, securing the last of the bandages on the driver's shoulder. "Those were Dalton boys. They don't take kindly to being interrupted." Jack's expression hardened. "Let them come. They know where to find me." Charlotte felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. She'd heard of the Dalton gang even in Boston, ruthless outlaws who ruled this territory with blood and fear. And this young cowboy had just made himself their enemy to save a coach full of strangers. "The driver can't go on," Jackson announced, standing and dusting off his hands. "And the coach is shot to hell. We're 15 miles from Rattlesnake Springs, 30 from Tucson. Too far to walk with injured folks." Jack surveyed the group, his mind clearly working through options. His gaze settled on Charlotte, and she felt the weight of it like a physical thing, assessing, calculating, but not unkind. "We can take 2 on our horses," he said slowly. "The rest will have to wait here while we fetch help from the springs. But that means leaving folks exposed, and those outlaws might get brave again once the sun starts setting." "I'll stay," Charlotte heard herself say. The words surprised her as much as they surprised the others. "I can shoot, if needed. My father taught me." It was true, though she hadn't touched a gun in 15 years. But something in her refused to be the helpless damsel, refused to be another burden for these men to carry. Jack studied her for a long moment, those storm-gray eyes seeming to see straight through to her bones. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Miss Whitmore." Jackson, you take the driver and the Thompsons to the Springs. I'll stay here with Miss Whitmore and Mr. Gates until you can bring back a wagon. Should be back before nightfall." Jackson looked like he wanted to argue, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Jack, if those boys do come back, then they'll find me waiting." Jack's voice carried a finality that ended all discussion. "Go on now. Driver's losing blood." Charlotte watched as Jackson helped the injured onto the horses, the elderly couple, the Thompsons, clinging to each other even in their fear. Within minutes, they were riding away, leaving Charlotte alone with Jack Calder and the semi-conscious salesman under the vast, indifferent sky. The silence that settled was different from before. Not threatening, but heavy with awareness. Charlotte sat back on her rock while Jack checked the perimeter, his rifle always in hand, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She found herself studying him in stolen glances, the way he moved, economical and sure, the set of his shoulders, broad despite his youth. The profile of his face, which belonged to someone much older than his years, suggested. "You always this brave?" His voice startled her. He'd settled into a position with his back against a boulder, positioned so he could watch both the northern approach and where she sat. "I'm not brave at all," Charlotte admitted. "I'm terrified. My hands are still shaking, see?" She held them out as proof. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face entirely, chasing away the hard lines and revealing someone heartbreakingly young. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Miss Whitmore. It's being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. You staying here, offering to shoot if needed, that's brave." Charlotte felt heat creep into her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. When was the last time someone had called her brave? When was the last time someone had looked at her with anything other than pity or contempt? "What brings a lady like you out to Arizona territory?" Jack asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Boston, if I had to guess." "Your accent gives you away." "You have a good ear." "I read a lot. Books can take you places even if your feet can't." He shifted slightly, resettling his rifle. "So? Running from something or running to something?" The question was too perceptive, too close to the bone. Charlotte looked away, out at the desert that had nearly killed her, that might still kill her before the day was done. "Both, maybe," she said quietly. "I'm meant to be a teacher in Tucson. The school board hired me sight unseen based on my credentials. But yes, I'm also leaving some things behind." "Things worth leaving?" Charlotte thought of Boston, of the whispers in the faculty lounge, of Thomas Ashford's cruel words when she'd finally confessed her feelings. "You're too old for romance, Charlotte. Too old to be anyone's wife. I need someone who can give me children, who can grow old with me, not ahead of me." The humiliation still burned like acid in her chest. "Yes," she said simply. "Worth leaving." Jack nodded, asking no more questions, and Charlotte found herself grateful for his discretion. They fell into a companionable silence, broken only by Mr. Gates's occasional groans from where he lay in the shade of the coach. The sun tracked slowly across the sky, and Charlotte felt exhaustion creeping in. The crash after terror, her body finally understanding it had survived. "You should rest," Jack said, as if reading her thoughts. "I'll keep watch." "What about you? You must be tired too." "I'm used to it." He tipped his hat down slightly, shading his eyes. "Grew up on night watches, keeping cattle from straying, keeping rustlers from stealing. Sleep when you can, stay alert when you can't. That's the cowboy way." Charlotte found herself curious despite her exhaustion. "How long have you been cowboying?" "Since I was 15, lost my folks to cholera, and the neighboring ranch took me in. Been working cattle ever since. 10 years now." 10 years, which made him 25 to her 35. An entire decade between them, though in this moment it felt like nothing at all. Age was just a number when bullets were flying and survival was all that mattered. "Do you like it? The life, I mean." Jack was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice carried something she couldn't quite name. Not quite sadness, but perhaps resignation. "It's honest work. Hard, but honest. The land doesn't lie, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. You work hard, you might prosper. You slack off, you'll suffer. There's a purity to that I appreciate." "But?" Charlotte prompted, hearing the unspoken word. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. But it's lonely. Cattle don't talk back. The land doesn't care if you live or die. Sometimes I think I could disappear into the desert and no one would notice for weeks. The honesty of it struck her like a blow. Here was this capable, handsome young man who'd just saved 5 lives without hesitation, and he felt invisible, forgotten. "I'd notice," she said before she could stop herself. "If you disappeared today, I'd notice. I'd remember you," Jack called her. "I'd tell everyone about the cowboy who saved my life when he had no reason to risk his own." The look he gave her could have set the desert on fire. "Charlotte," he said, and the way he spoke her name, gentle, wondering, like it was something precious, made her heart stutter in her chest. Thank you. That means more than you know." The moment stretched between them, crackling with something Charlotte didn't dare name. Then Mr. Gates groaned loudly, breaking the spell, and Jack was up in an instant, checking on the injured man, offering water and reassurance. Charlotte watched him work, watched the careful tenderness in his hands, the patience in his voice, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something dangerous. Something she'd promised herself she'd never feel again after Thomas's rejection. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "He's a child. You're old enough to be, well, not his mother, but his older sister at least. This is ridiculous. He's just being kind because you survived something terrible together. That's all this is." But when Jack settled back against his boulder and caught her eye, offering a small smile that made her stomach flip, Charlotte knew she was lying to herself. The afternoon wore on. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Charlotte dozed fitfully, jerking awake every time a bird called or the wind kicked up dust. Each time she found Jack exactly where he'd been, vigilant and steady, keeping watch over her and Mr. Gates like it was his sacred duty. "Tell me about Boston," he said during one of her waking moments, perhaps sensing she needed distraction from her spiraling thoughts. "What's it like? I've never been east of Santa Fe." Charlotte sat up, smoothing her ruined dress self-consciously. "It's different. Buildings everywhere, stacked up toward the sky. Streets full of people rushing about their business. Noise constantly. Carriages, vendors, church bells, factory whistles. You're never alone, but you can still be lonely." "Sounds like hell," Jack said frankly, and Charlotte laughed, actually laughed, the sound startling in the desert silence. Sometimes it was. But it had beauty too. Libraries full of more books than you could read in a lifetime. Museums with paintings and sculptures from around the world. The harbor at dawn, with the ships coming in, bringing spices and silks and stories from far away. Jack listened intently, his head tilted slightly like he was memorizing every word. "You miss it?" "Some parts, but not the parts that matter." She paused, then decided to take a risk. "Not the loneliness, not the judgment. People back there, they have such rigid ideas about what a woman should be, how she should act, who she's allowed to love. I got tired of fitting into boxes I was never meant to fill." "Who says anyone should fit in boxes?" Jack's voice carried an edge of anger. "Seems to me people should be free to live how they want, love who they want, be who they are. Life's too short and too hard for anything else." Charlotte felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "That's exactly right. That's exactly what I believe too." "Then you're in the right place, Miss Whitmore. West doesn't care about your past, doesn't care about what society thinks you should be. Out here, you make yourself into whoever you have the courage to become." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that she could remake herself, that she could step out of the shadow of shame and regret and become someone new, someone brave, someone worthy of the second chance she'd been given. "What about you?" she asked. "Who are you becoming?" Jack called her. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes distant. "I'm trying to become someone who matters, someone who leaves something behind worth remembering. But I'm still figuring out what that looks like." "You already matter," Charlotte said softly. "You saved 5 lives today. If that's not worth remembering, I don't know what is." Jack looked at her with an expression so raw, so vulnerable, it made her breath catch. "You're a kind woman, Charlotte Whitmore. I hope Tucson knows how lucky they are to get you." Before Charlotte could respond, before she could tell him that she was the lucky one, that meeting him had somehow shifted her entire understanding of what her life in the West might hold. She heard it, the distant rumble of wagon wheels, the sound of horses, voices calling out. Jack was on his feet in an instant, rifle ready, but then he relaxed. It's Jackson. They're back. Relief washed through Charlotte so powerfully her knees went weak. They'd made it. They'd survived. As the wagon crested the rise, Charlotte found herself wanting to freeze this moment. The desert painted in sunset gold, Jack Calder standing guard over her like some avenging angel, the feeling that despite everything that had gone wrong today, something had also gone profoundly right. Jackson pulled the wagon up, another man driving while he rode alongside. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine," Jack confirmed. "Mr. Gates needs a doctor, but he'll make it." They loaded Mr. Gates into the wagon bed, cushioning him with blankets someone had brought from town. Jackson helped Charlotte up onto the bench seat, and she felt the loss of Jack's presence immediately, like the sun going behind a cloud. "Miss Whitmore can ride with us," Jackson said. "Jack, you'll follow on paint?" But Jack was already at the side of the wagon, looking up at Charlotte with those storm-gray eyes. "You all right to ride? It's going to be a rough journey to the Springs." "I'll manage." She tried to smile, but wasn't sure she succeeded. "Thank you again, Mr. Calder, for everything." He touched his hat brim again, that old-fashioned gesture that made her heart ache. "My pleasure, ma'am, truly." The wagon lurched into motion, and Charlotte gripped the edge of the seat to steady herself. She looked back once and found Jack mounting his paint horse with fluid grace, settling into the saddle like he was born there. He caught her looking, and something passed between them, a promise, a possibility. A door opening to something neither of them had expected. The journey to Rattlesnake Springs took 2 hours over rough terrain, the wagon jostling and bouncing until Charlotte's teeth ached, but she barely noticed the discomfort. Her mind was too full of the day's events, of near death and rescue, of a young cowboy with old eyes who'd looked at her like she was something precious. Rattlesnake Springs turned out to be less a town and more a collection of buildings clustered around a natural spring, a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and a few other structures she couldn't identify in the gathering darkness. Lamplight spilled from windows, warm and welcoming after the cold vastness of the desert. Jackson helped her down from the wagon while others rushed to deal with Mr. Gates. Charlotte stood on shaky legs trying to get her bearings when she felt a presence at her elbow. Jack, appearing as silently as a ghost. "Mrs. Henderson runs the boarding house," he said quietly. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. I'll see you settled there." "You don't have to—" "I know I don't have to. I want to." His voice was firm but gentle. "Please. Let me at least know you're safe before I ride back to the ranch." Charlotte nodded, too exhausted to argue, too grateful for his continued presence to push him away. They walked together through the dusty main street, Jack's hand hovering near her elbow but not quite touching, as if he was afraid to presume. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Poor dear," she clucked when Jack explained what had happened. Come in, come in. I'll get you settled in our best room. Are you hurt?" "Just shaken," Charlotte managed. "But I'd love a bath if one's available." Of course. I'll heat the water myself." Mrs. Henderson bustled away, leaving Charlotte and Jack standing awkwardly in the small parlor. "I should go," Jack said, but he didn't move. "Long ride back to the ranch still ahead of me." "Will you be safe? Those outlaws." "They won't bother me tonight. They'll be licking their wounds, planning their next move. But I'll be careful." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "When are you heading to Tucson?" "The morning stage, I suppose, if there is one." "There is. Leaves at dawn." Jack shifted his weight, and Charlotte realized with a start that he was nervous. This capable, brave young man was actually nervous talking to her. "Charlotte, could I write to you? In Tucson? I know it's forward, and you probably think I'm just a rough cowboy with no education, but I'd like to know how you're settling in, if you're happy there." Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. She should say no. She should maintain proper distance. She was 10 years older, a respectable schoolteacher, and he was a cowboy barely out of boyhood. This was inappropriate on every level Boston society would recognize. But she wasn't in Boston anymore. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "I'd like that very much, Jack." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night, brilliant and transformative. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small pencil and a scrap of paper, scribbling quickly. "This is the ranch address, White Star Ranch, care of Jack Calder. Write to me when you're settled, please." Charlotte took the paper, their fingers brushing again, that same electric connection sparking between them. "I will. I promise." Mrs. Henderson returned then, announcing the bath was ready and the spell was broken. Jack stepped back, putting proper distance between them once more, his hat pulled low. "Safe travels tomorrow, Miss Whitmore." The formal address again, because they had an audience, because propriety demanded it. But his eyes told a different story entirely. "Safe travels home, Mr. Calder." She watched him go, watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the lamplight, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just attraction, though God knew that was there, crackling like lightning between them, but hope. The fragile, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, her life in the West would hold more than just teaching children and living quietly. Maybe it would hold Jack Calder. Charlotte clutched the scrap of paper with his address, pressing it against her heart like a talisman as she climbed the stairs to her room. Behind her, the desert night settled in, full of dangers and possibilities in equal measure. And somewhere out there, riding toward his ranch under a sky full of stars, Jack Calder was thinking of her. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. The bath was hot and soothing, washing away the dust and blood and fear of the day. But it couldn't wash away the memory of storm-gray eyes and gentle hands, of a voice that had called her brave, of a young man who'd looked at her like she was worth saving. Charlotte dried herself and slipped into the clean nightgown Mrs. Henderson had provided. She stood at the window, looking out at Rattlesnake Springs, this tiny outpost that marked the boundary between her old life and whatever came next. Tomorrow she'd board the stage to Tucson. Tomorrow she'd meet the school board, settle into her new position, begin the work of teaching frontier children. Tomorrow she'd start building the respectable, quiet life she'd promised herself. But tonight, she allowed herself to think of Jack, to remember the way he'd pulled her from the wreckage, to imagine what it might be like to receive a letter in his hand, to write back, to build something, friendship perhaps, or maybe something more, across the vast desert distances. I'm too old for him, she thought, but the protest felt weaker now, drowned out by the memory of his voice saying her name like it was something precious. Charlotte pulled the scrap of paper from her bag, smoothing it flat on the small writing desk. White Star Ranch, care of Jack Calder. She traced the letters with her finger, memorizing them, making a promise to herself. She would write. She would take this chance, whatever it might bring. Because Jack Calder had saved her life today. But maybe, just maybe, he'd done something even more important. Maybe he'd reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of feeling, still worthy of someone looking at her the way he had, like she was the most remarkable woman in the world. Charlotte climbed into bed, exhaustion finally claiming her. As she drifted toward sleep, she could have sworn she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats, as if Jack had paused on his journey home to look back at the boarding house one last time. She smiled into the darkness and let sleep take her, her dreams full of storm-gray eyes and promises whispered under an endless western sky. The morning stage to Tucson arrived at Rattlesnake Springs just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. Charlotte stood on the boarding house porch with her small travel bag, the only possession that had survived yesterday's attack intact. Mrs. Henderson had pressed a package of biscuits into her hands, along with a motherly kiss on the cheek, and now Charlotte waited, her stomach tight with nerves that had nothing to do with stagecoach travel. She'd barely slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen Jack's face, the intensity in his storm-gray eyes, the gentle curve of his smile, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered. And clutched in her hand, folded small and precious, was the paper with his address. The stage pulled up in a cloud of dust, and Charlotte recognized the driver from yesterday. Not the injured man, but his replacement, a grizzled veteran named Coop, who'd helped with the rescue. He tipped his hat when he saw her. "Morning, Miss Whitmore. Glad to see you in one piece. Heard you had quite the adventure yesterday." "That's one word for it." Charlotte managed a smile. "Is it safe? The route to Tucson?" "Safe as it ever is, ma'am. Got 2 armed guards riding shotgun today, and we're taking the southern route. Adds an hour, but keeps us clear of where those Dalton boys usually operate." He climbed down to help her with her bag. "You'll be in Tucson by early afternoon, God willing." Charlotte settled into her seat inside the coach, grateful to find she was the only passenger for this leg of the journey. She needed time to think, to process everything that had happened, to figure out what she was doing, entertaining thoughts about a cowboy 10 years her junior. The stage lurched into motion, and Charlotte watched Rattlesnake Springs recede into the distance. Somewhere out there, beyond the ridges and valleys, was White Star Ranch. Was Jack awake yet? Was he thinking of her the way she couldn't stop thinking of him? "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You're being ridiculous. He was kind to you in a crisis. That's all. Don't build castles in the desert sand." But her fingers found the folded paper in her pocket anyway, tracing its edges like a prayer. The journey to Tucson passed without incident, the miles rolling by in a monotony of sage and stone. Charlotte dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, her body still remembering yesterday's terror. But Coop's promised guards kept vigilant watch, and no outlaws appeared to test their resolve. Tucson materialized from the desert haze like a mirage made solid, a proper town this time, with a main street lined with businesses, a church steeple rising white against the blue sky, and actual houses with fenced yards and gardens struggling against the arid climate. It was bigger than Rattlesnake Springs, more established, and as the stage rolled down Main Street, Charlotte felt the weight of her new life settling onto her shoulders. This was it, her fresh start, her chance to leave Boston's whispers and Thomas Ashford's cruelty behind. The stage stopped in front of the territorial office, and Coop helped her down. "School board said they'd meet you at the hotel, Miss Whitmore. The Tucson house, just down the street there. Can't miss it." Charlotte thanked him and gathered her bag, suddenly aware of how she must look. Travel-stained and exhausted, her good dress ruined beyond repair, her hair escaping its pins in wild tendrils. What kind of first impression would she make on the school board, looking like a refugee from a disaster? Well, she was a refugee from a disaster. There was no help for it now. The Tucson house was a 2-story building with a wide porch and surprisingly elegant curtains in the windows. Charlotte climbed the steps and entered a lobby that smelled of beeswax and coffee, where a young clerk looked up from his ledger with a welcoming smile. "You must be Miss Whitmore. The school board's been expecting you. They're waiting in the dining room." He gestured toward a set of double doors. "Can I take your bag to your room? It's already prepared." Charlotte handed over her bag with relief and smoothed her skirts as best she could. "Thank you. I apologize for my appearance. The journey was eventful." "So we heard. Word travels fast in the territory. Everyone's talking about the attack and the rescue. You're quite the celebrity already." The clerk grinned. "Go on in. They don't bite, I promise." Charlotte pushed through the double doors and found herself in a pleasant dining room where 3 people sat around a large table, 2 men and a woman, all watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. The older of the 2 men stood immediately, extending his hand. "Miss Whitmore, thank God you're safe. We heard about the attack. Absolutely terrible. I'm Horace Pemberton, head of the school board." He was portly and balding, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "This is Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, also on the board, and Reverend Samuel Walsh." Charlotte shook hands all around, taking in her new employers. Mrs. Thornton was elegant despite the frontier setting, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her dress fashionable even by Boston standards. The Reverend was younger, perhaps 40, with the earnest expression of someone who took his calling very seriously. "Please sit," Mrs. Thornton said, her voice cultured and warm. "You must be exhausted. Have you eaten?" "Not since yesterday." Charlotte settled into the offered chair, and immediately a server appeared with coffee and a plate of food, steak and eggs and fresh bread that made her mouth water. "Eat first, then we'll talk," Horace said firmly. "Business can wait until you've recovered a bit." Charlotte didn't need to be told twice. She ate with single-minded focus, aware of the others making polite small talk around her, giving her space to regain her strength. The food was simple but well prepared, and she felt energy returning to her limbs with each bite. Finally, she set down her fork and looked up to find all three watching her with expressions of relief. "Better?" Mrs. Thornton asked. "Much, thank you." Charlotte reached for her coffee, grateful for its warmth. "I apologize again for my appearance and my tardiness. The attack delayed everything." "We're just grateful you're alive," Reverend Walsh said seriously. "We've been praying for your safety since we heard. The Dalton gang. They're ruthless. How did you manage to escape?" Charlotte's hands tightened on her coffee cup. "I didn't escape. I was rescued. A cowboy named Jack Calder and his partner heard the shooting and intervened. Mr. Calder stayed with me until help arrived. If not for him, I wouldn't be here." Something shifted in the room. Mrs. Thornton and Reverend Walsh exchanged a glance Charlotte couldn't quite read, while Horace's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "Jack Calder," Horace repeated slowly, "of the White Star Ranch?" "Yes, that's right. Do you know him?" Another exchange of looks. Mrs. Thornton leaned forward slightly, her expression carefully neutral. "We know of him, dear. Everyone in the territory knows of Jack Calder. He has quite the reputation." Charlotte's stomach clenched. "What kind of reputation?" Reverend Walsh cleared his throat uncomfortably. "He's known as a fighter, Miss Whitmore, skilled with weapons, quick to violence when provoked. He's killed men, several of them, in fact. The Dalton gang has been after him for years because he killed one of their own in a dispute over cattle." The world tilted slightly. Charlotte set down her cup before she could drop it. "He killed someone?" "In self-defense," Horace added quickly. "Or so the story goes. The Dalton boy drew on him first in a saloon. Jack was faster. But still, it's not the kind of association we'd typically encourage for our schoolteacher." Mrs. Thornton reached across the table, patting Charlotte's hand. Now, let's not alarm her unnecessarily. Mr. Calder did save her life, after all. That speaks to some measure of honor. We're merely suggesting that perhaps it would be best to keep a distance. Your reputation here is important, dear. As the schoolteacher, you'll be held to a higher standard of propriety." Charlotte felt cold despite the coffee. They were warning her off. They were telling her that Jack, brave, gentle Jack who'd called her remarkable, was dangerous. Someone to avoid. But they didn't know him. They didn't see how he'd looked at her. They hadn't heard the loneliness in his voice when he talked about disappearing into the desert. "I understand," Charlotte said carefully, tucking her feelings away behind the mask of propriety she'd perfected in Boston. "You needn't worry. Mr. Calder was kind enough to rescue me, but I don't expect to see him again. Tucson is my home now. My focus is the school." The relief in the room was palpable. Horace beamed, Reverend Walsh nodded approvingly, and Mrs. Thornton squeezed her hand. "Excellent. Now, let's discuss the particulars. School starts in 1 week, which gives you time to settle in and prepare. We have 23 students ranging from age 6 to 15. The schoolhouse is modest but well maintained. Your salary is $40 a month, plus room and board, here at the hotel." Charlotte listened, nodded, asked appropriate questions, and played the part of the grateful, proper schoolteacher they expected. But inside her mind was racing. Jack had killed someone. He was dangerous, according to the town. He had enemies. The Dalton gang wanted him dead. And yet, when she thought of him, all she could see was the gentleness in his hands when he'd helped her from the wreckage, the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd asked if he could write to her. The meeting concluded with plans to show her the schoolhouse the following day. Charlotte excused herself and climbed the stairs to her room, her body aching with exhaustion, but her mind unable to rest. The room was small but clean, with a proper bed, a writing desk, and a window overlooking Main Street. Charlotte stood at that window watching Tucson citizens go about their business, women with shopping baskets, men conducting business, children playing in the street. Her new home. Her new life. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket and smoothed it on the desk. White Star Ranch, care of Jack Calder. He'd asked her to write. But should she? The school board had made their position clear. Association with Jack Calder would damage her reputation before she'd even begun teaching. She couldn't afford another scandal, another failure. But the thought of not writing, of letting that connection die before it had even begun, made her chest ache. Charlotte sat at the desk and pulled out her writing supplies, one of the few possessions that had survived in her bag. She stared at the blank paper for a long moment, pen hovering, torn between sense and feeling. Finally, she began to write. Dear Mr. Calder, I arrived safely in Tucson today and wanted you to know that I am well settled. The school board has been most welcoming, and I begin my duties next week. I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your intervention yesterday. You saved my life, and I will never forget that kindness. She paused, reading over the formal words. They were safe, appropriate, exactly what she should write. Charlotte crumpled the paper and started again. Dear Jack, I can't stop thinking about you. Is that too forward? Probably. But yesterday changed something in me, and I can't pretend otherwise. They warned me about you today, the school board. They said you're dangerous, that you've killed men, that I should keep my distance. But when I think of you, all I remember is gentleness. You looked at me like I mattered, and I haven't felt that way in so long. She stopped, her hand shaking. Too much. Too honest. Too dangerous. The third attempt was somewhere in between, warm but not too familiar, grateful but not presumptuous, leaving the door open without walking through it herself. She sealed it, addressed it, and held it for a long moment. Posting this letter was a choice, a risk. But Charlotte Whitmore was tired of playing it safe. She took the letter downstairs and asked the clerk where she might find the post office. 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Charlotte met with parents, inventoried the schoolhouse supplies, and began planning her lessons. Tucson welcomed her with open arms, invitations to dinner, offers of help, genuine warmth from families grateful to have a real teacher from back east. But every evening Charlotte found herself standing at her window, looking out toward the distant ridges where White Star Ranch lay somewhere beyond sight. Had her letter reached him? Would he write back? Or had the school board's warnings been accurate? Was Jack Calder someone she should fear rather than trust? On the fourth day, as Charlotte was reviewing arithmetic primers in the schoolhouse, Mrs. Thornton appeared in the doorway with a peculiar expression. Charlotte, dear, you have a visitor, a young man. Charlotte's heart leapt. Who? He says his name is Jack Calder. The world stopped. Charlotte stood slowly, her hands gripping the desk for support. He's here? In Tucson? Mrs. Thornton's expression was tight with disapproval. He's waiting outside. I told him it wasn't appropriate for him to call on you, but he insisted. He says he has something that belongs to you. She paused. Charlotte, perhaps you should send him away. People are already talking. But Charlotte was already moving toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pushed past Mrs. Thornton and out into the bright afternoon sunlight. There, standing beside his paint horse on the street outside the schoolhouse, was Jack Calder. He looked different in full daylight, without the urgency of crisis surrounding them. Taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, with that same easy grace she'd noticed before. He'd cleaned up, fresh shirt, hat brushed free of dust, but he still looked every inch the cowboy, out of place among Tucson's more civilized streets. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that stole her breath. Charlotte. Just her name, but the way he said it made her knees weak. She was aware of eyes watching from windows, of Mrs. Thornton hovering disapprovingly behind her, of Reverend Walsh emerging from the church across the street with a frown. But she didn't care. Jack, what are you doing here? He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, Charlotte gasped. It was her mother's daguerreotype, the one she thought she'd lost in the attack. Found it in the wreckage when I went back to help salvage the coach, he said, stepping closer. Figured it might be important to you. Charlotte took the photograph with trembling hands. Her mother's face looked back at her, captured forever in silver and glass, miraculously unbroken. You went back? To that place? Had to make sure nothing valuable got left behind for scavengers. He shrugged like it was nothing, like riding back to the site of an attack was just another day's work. Recognized you in the photograph. Figured it was yours. Tears pricked Charlotte's eyes. This photograph was all she had left of her mother, and she'd thought it was gone forever. Thank you, she whispered. This means everything. Jack's expression softened. I'm glad I could return it. He glanced around, clearly noting the watching eyes, the tension in the air. I should go. I don't want to cause you trouble. Wait. Charlotte caught his arm without thinking, then immediately released it when she heard Mrs. Thornton's sharp intake of breath behind her. I wrote to you. Did you get my letter? Not yet. Mail's slow out to the ranch. His eyes searched her face. But I'll watch for it. Charlotte, are you happy here? Such a simple question, but loaded with meaning. Was she happy? She was safe, employed, welcomed. She had everything she'd come west to find. But looking at Jack Calder standing in the sunlight, she realized happiness might require something more. I'm settling in, she said carefully. The school board has been very kind. The town is welcoming. Something flickered in Jack's eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. That's good. You deserve kindness. He stepped back toward his horse, putting distance between them. I should ride back before dark. It's a long way. Jack, take care of yourself, Charlotte Whitmore. He swung into the saddle with that fluid grace that made her heart ache. Maybe I'll see you around sometime. He touched his hat brim in that old-fashioned gesture that had already become dear to her, then turned his horse toward the edge of town. Charlotte watched him ride away, her mother's photograph clutched against her chest, aware of Mrs. Thornton's presence behind her like a judgmental shadow. Charlotte, the older woman said quietly, please tell me you're not developing feelings for that young man. Charlotte turned to face her, and something in her expression must have been answer enough because Mrs. Thornton's face fell. Oh dear, this is… Charlotte, he's completely unsuitable. The age difference alone. 10 years, Charlotte said flatly. I'm aware. It's not just that. His reputation, his violent past, his lack of education and refinement. He reads, Charlotte interrupted. He's thoughtful and brave and kind. He saved my life and just rode hours to return something precious to me. What about that speaks to lack of character? Mrs. Thornton's expression shifted from disapproval to something gentler. Pity, perhaps. My dear girl, I understand. He's handsome and heroic, and you've been through a traumatic experience together. But these feelings will pass. You're a respectable teacher now. You have a position to maintain. The parents won't accept their children being taught by a woman who associates with gunfighters and cowboys. The truth of it hit Charlotte like a blow. Mrs. Thornton was right. She'd fled Boston to escape scandal, only to risk creating a new one before she'd even taught her first lesson. I understand, Charlotte said quietly. You needn't worry. I won't jeopardize my position. Mrs. Thornton's face relaxed with relief. I'm glad you see reason. Now, why don't we review the curriculum? I have some suggestions about teaching methods that might help with the older children. Charlotte followed her back into the schoolhouse, but her mind was miles away, following a cowboy on a paint horse as he rode back toward his lonely ranch. That evening, Charlotte sat at her desk and pulled out writing paper again. She'd promised to write to Jack, and she would keep that promise. But this letter would be different from the one she'd sent before. This one would be honest about the impossibility of what they both clearly felt. Dear Jack, she began, then stopped. How did you tell someone that the world wouldn't allow what your heart desperately wanted? How did you explain that propriety and reputation mattered more than connection and feeling? Charlotte sat for an hour, pen poised, unable to write the words that would close the door on possibilities. Finally, she gave up and went to bed, the letter unwritten, her heart heavy with choices she didn't want to make. The next morning, she woke to find an envelope had been slipped under her door. Her name was written on it in an unfamiliar hand, strong, clear strokes that somehow seemed masculine even in their elegance. Charlotte's hands shook as she opened it. Charlotte, I know I shouldn't write this. I know I should let you settle into your new life without complications, but I can't stop thinking about you. When I close my eyes, I see you in the wreckage, brave and beautiful even in terror. When I read, I imagine telling you about the stories, hearing your thoughts. When I ride the range, I find myself composing letters in my head that I'll probably never send. They warned you about me, didn't they? Told you I'm dangerous, violent, unsuitable? They're not wrong. I've killed men. I'll probably kill more before my time is done. This land doesn't forgive weakness, and the Daltons won't stop until one of us is dead. But Charlotte, when I'm with you, I feel like I could be something more than a gun hand, something better. You look at me like I matter, like I'm worth knowing, and I want desperately to be the man you see when you look at me that way. I'm too young for you, I know, too rough, too uneducated, too dangerous, but I'm asking anyway. Would you let me try? Let me court you properly, take you to dinner, prove that I can be a gentleman when the situation calls for it? I understand if you say no. I understand if you've already decided I'm impossible. But I had to ask, because I've never felt this way before, and I can't let it go without at least trying. Yours, Jack. Charlotte read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. He'd poured his heart onto the page, made himself vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely did, and he was asking for exactly what she wanted but couldn't allow herself to have. She pressed the letter to her chest and made a decision. Propriety be damned, reputation be damned. She'd spent her entire life in Boston doing what was expected, being who others needed her to be, and where had it gotten her? Heartbroken and humiliated, fleeing scandal. Maybe it was time to choose differently. Maybe it was time to choose for herself. Charlotte dressed quickly and hurried downstairs. The clerk looked up in surprise. Is there a way to get a message to White Star Ranch quickly? Well, there's a supply wagon heading that direction this afternoon. They could deliver a letter if you have one ready. Give me 10 minutes. Charlotte rushed back to her room and grabbed paper and pen. This time, the words flowed without hesitation. Jack, yes. The answer is yes. I don't care what they say about you. I don't care about the age difference or propriety or reputation. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. You see me, really see me, and that's worth more than all the respectability in the world. But we need to be careful. The school board has made their position clear. If they think I'm involved with you, I'll lose this position, and I can't afford another failure. So if we do this, we do it quietly. We'll find a way to see each other without causing scandal. I know it's not ideal. I know you deserve someone who can claim you openly. But I'm asking you to be patient with me while I figure out how to balance what I want with what I need. Come to the dance next Saturday. The whole town will be there for the harvest celebration. We can see each other in public without raising suspicion. Dance with me, Jack called her. Let me pretend for one evening that the world doesn't care about age or reputation or anything but the feeling of your hand in mine. Yours, Charlotte. She sealed it, addressed it, and took it downstairs before she could second-guess herself. The clerk promised to get it on the supply wagon, and Charlotte returned to her room feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff with no idea if she could fly. The week passed in agonizing slowness. Charlotte taught her first lessons, met more families, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed Jack's visit. Some were merely curious. Who was this handsome cowboy who'd ridden into town for the new teacher? Others were more pointed. Had Miss Whitmore already attracted unsuitable attention? Mrs. Thornton made a point of mentioning appropriate social connections Charlotte might make. The general store owner's son recently returned from university. The new banker, a widower with good prospects. Respectable men, stable men, men who would enhance rather than endanger her position. Charlotte smiled and nodded and thought of storm-gray eyes. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal for the outdoor dance being held in the town square. Charlotte dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She arranged her hair with unusual care, trying to tame the gray streak curls into something elegant. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman of 35 trying desperately not to look it, trying to be young enough, pretty enough, worthy enough for a man 10 years her junior. Stop it, she told herself. Jack sees you, the real you. That's what matters. The dance was already in full swing when Charlotte arrived. The town square had been transformed with lanterns and bunting, a small band playing energetic reels while couples spun across the makeshift dance floor. Children ran between the adults, shrieking with laughter. The smell of barbecue and fresh bread hung in the air. Charlotte scanned the crowd, her heart in her throat. Was Jack here? Had he received her letter? Or had he decided she was too much trouble, too complicated, too... Charlotte. She spun around, and there he was. Jack, cleaned up in what were clearly his best clothes, pressed trousers, a vest that actually matched his shirt, his hair combed back. He looked young and handsome and so nervous her heart melted. You came, she breathed. You asked me to. His eyes traveled over her face like he was memorizing every detail. You look beautiful. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Calder. A smile tugged at his lips. I can be civilized when I need to be. They stood there, drinking each other in, until Mrs. Thornton's pointed cough behind them broke the spell. Charlotte turned to find the older woman watching with barely concealed disapproval. Miss Whitmore, I believe Mr. Henderson was hoping to speak with you about his daughter's arithmetic lessons. A dismissal, clear as day. Charlotte felt Jack tense beside her. Of course, Charlotte said smoothly. But first, I believe Mr. Calder was about to ask me to dance. Weren't you, Mr. Calder? Jack caught on immediately. Would you do me the honor, Miss Whitmore? I'd be delighted. Charlotte took his offered arm, feeling Mrs. Thornton's disapproval like a physical weight on her shoulders. But as Jack led her onto the dance floor and pulled her into the waltz position, everything else faded away. His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady through the fabric of her dress. His other hand clasped hers, and that electric connection sparked between them, just as it had the first time they'd touched. He moved with surprising grace for a cowboy, guiding her through the steps with confidence. You dance well, Charlotte said, surprised. My mother taught me before she died. Said a man should know how to treat a lady properly, even on the frontier. His eyes held hers, intense and searching. Charlotte, are you sure about this? About us? Because if you have doubts, tell me now. I don't want to make your life harder. Charlotte looked around the dance floor, at the respectable couples, the watching families, the life she was supposed to want. Then she looked back at Jack, at the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope barely dared. I'm sure, she whispered. I'm terrified, but I'm sure. His hand tightened at her waist, drawing her imperceptibly closer. Then we'll figure it out. Together. They danced in silence for a moment, lost in each other, until Reverend Walsh cut in with pointed courtesy. Jack had no choice but to relinquish her, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of proper dances with proper partners, the store owner's son, the banker, other respectable men of Tucson. But Charlotte's eyes kept finding Jack across the crowd. He danced with other women, too, playing the part of a gentleman, but his gaze returned to her again and again. As the evening wound down, Jack appeared at her elbow once more. Walk with me, he murmured. Just to your hotel, propriety and all. Charlotte nodded, her heart racing. She made her goodbyes and accepted Jack's arm for the short walk down Main Street. The night was beautiful, the stars brilliant overhead, the sounds of the dance fading behind them. I got your letter, Jack said quietly when they were alone. Been carrying it in my pocket ever since, reading it so many times I've got it memorized. And I think you're right, we have to be careful. But Charlotte, he stopped, turning to face her. I want you to know something. I don't care about being secret or careful or any of it. If it were up to me, I'd court you openly, let the whole territory know you're mine. But I understand why we can't. And I'll take whatever you can give me, for as long as you'll give it. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I can't be braver. You're the bravest woman I know. Jack's hand lifted, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. You survived an attack. You came west alone. You're building a new life from nothing. Don't ever apologize for protecting yourself. They stood there in the darkness, so close Charlotte could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell leather and soap and something uniquely Jack. She wanted desperately to close the distance, to feel his arms around her, to kiss him the way she'd been dreaming about all week. But they were on Main Street, and eyes were everywhere. There's a creek, Jack said softly, about a mile north of town. Cottonwood's there, private. I could meet you there tomorrow afternoon, if you want. Charlotte knew what he was asking. A secret meeting, away from prying eyes. The first real step down a path that could ruin her. What time? She whispered. The smile that broke across his face was worth any risk. 2 o'clock? I'll be there. They'd reached the hotel. Jack stepped back, putting proper distance between them, and touched his hat brim. Good night, Miss Whitmore. Good night, Mr. Calder. Charlotte watched him walk away, her heart pounding with equal parts anticipation and fear. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would meet him in secret, and whatever happened next would seal her fate one way or another. She climbed the stairs to her room and stood at the window, watching the shadows of Tucson's streets. Somewhere out there, Jack was riding back to his ranch, carrying her letter close to his heart. And tomorrow, they would find out if love born in gunfire could survive in the light of day. Charlotte barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jack's face in the lamplight, heard his voice saying her name like a prayer, felt the phantom warmth of his hand at her waist. When dawn finally broke over Tucson, she was already awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince herself she wasn't making the biggest mistake of her life. Sunday morning meant church, and Charlotte dressed with extra care, aware that every eye in town would be evaluating the new school teacher. She chose a modest gray dress with a high collar, pinned her hair severely back, and practiced her most respectable expression in the mirror. If she was going to meet Jack in secret that afternoon, she needed to be beyond reproach this morning. The church was full when she arrived, families packed into pews, their Sunday best smelling of mothballs and hope. Reverend Walsh stood at the pulpit, his expression solemn as he prepared to deliver his sermon. Charlotte found a seat near the back, nodding politely to the families who greeted her, painfully aware of the whispers that followed her entrance. She'd barely settled when she felt it, that prickling awareness that meant someone was watching her. Charlotte glanced around and her breath caught. There, 3 rows ahead and across the aisle, sat Jack Calder. He was cleaned up again, hair still damp from washing, wearing what must be his only suit, slightly too small in the shoulders, the fabric worn but clean. He sat alone, his hat balanced on his knee, looking profoundly uncomfortable among the respectable families. When their eyes met, something passed between them that made Charlotte's cheeks flush hot. He came to church. For her. To prove he could be the kind of man she deserved. Reverend Walsh began his sermon, something about temptation and the strength to resist earthly pleasures, but Charlotte heard none of it. All her attention was focused on Jack 3 rows ahead, on the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed nervously against his hat brim, the occasional glance he stole in her direction. The service seemed to last forever. When it finally ended, Charlotte was swept up in the tide of congregants heading outside, where people lingered to socialize in the morning sun. She found herself cornered by Mrs. Thornton and a cluster of other board members, all smiles and pointed questions about her first week of teaching. "The children seem quite taken with you," Mrs. Thornton said, her tone approving. "Young Timothy Henderson said you made arithmetic actually interesting." His mother was thrilled. "I'm glad to hear it." Charlotte tried to focus on the conversation, but her awareness kept drifting to where Jack stood on the edge of the crowd, clearly out of place among the families. "We're having a ladies' tea this afternoon," Mrs. Patterson, another board member, chimed in. "At my home, 2 o'clock. We'd love for you to join us, get to know the other women of Tucson properly." 2 o'clock. The exact time she was supposed to meet Jack at the creek. Charlotte's mind raced. Refusing would seem odd, possibly suspicious, but accepting meant missing her meeting with Jack, meant breaking the promise she'd made just hours ago. "I'm not sure I can—" she began, but Mrs. Thornton cut her off with a firm hand on her arm. "Nonsense, dear. Of course you'll come. It's important for you to establish proper connections in town. The right friendships make all the difference for a woman in your position." The emphasis on proper and right was clear as glass. This wasn't really an invitation, it was a test. Would Charlotte choose respectability, or would she choose something else? Charlotte caught Jack's eye across the crowd. He was watching the exchange, and she saw the moment he understood what was happening. His expression shifted from hope to resignation, his shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. "Of course," Charlotte heard herself say, the words tasting like ash. "I'd be delighted to attend." Mrs. Thornton beamed. "Wonderful. 2 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." The crowd began to disperse, families heading home for Sunday dinner. Charlotte stood rooted to the spot, watching Jack turn toward where his horse was tethered. She wanted to run after him, to explain, to apologize, but Mrs. Thornton's hand remained firmly on her arm. "A wise choice, dear," the older woman said quietly. "I know it's difficult, but you'll thank me later. Young men like Jack Calder are exciting, I'm sure, but they're not built for the long term. You need stability, security, a man who can give you the life you deserve." Charlotte watched Jack swing into his saddle with that fluid grace she'd come to recognize. He didn't look back as he rode away, his spine straight, his head high. Pride, she realized. He was too proud to let her see how much this hurt. And she'd done it to him. She'd promised to meet him and then chosen propriety instead. The ladies' tea was exactly as tedious as Charlotte had feared. Mrs. Patterson's parlor was stifling with too many bodies and not enough air, the conversation revolving around recipes and gardening and the scandalous behavior of some woman in Phoenix who'd run off with a traveling salesman. Charlotte sipped weak tea and smiled and nodded and felt like she was suffocating. "You seem distracted, dear," Mrs. Thornton observed when there was a lull in conversation. "Not having second thoughts about staying in Tucson, I hope?" "No, of course not." Charlotte forced brightness into her voice. "Just tired, I suppose. It's been quite a week." "Well, you'll feel better once you're properly settled. Perhaps we should discuss potential suitors for you." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward conspiratorially. "A woman of your age shouldn't be alone. The banker, Mr. Winters, has been asking about you. He's 42, financially stable, very respectable. Lost his wife 3 years ago to consumption and has been looking for a suitable companion." Charlotte's fingers tightened on her teacup. "I'm not looking for a husband, Mrs. Patterson. I came here to teach, not to marry. But surely you don't intend to remain alone forever?" Another woman, Mrs. Clark, joined the conversation. "Teaching is all well and good, but a woman needs a man's protection, especially out here. And at your age, you can't afford to be too particular." At your age. The words landed like a slap. Charlotte was suddenly, viscerally reminded of Thomas Ashford in Boston, telling her she was too old for love, too old to be wanted. "I'm 35, not ancient," Charlotte said, her voice sharper than intended. "And I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." The room fell silent. Mrs. Thornton's expression shifted to concern, while the other women exchanged meaningful glances. "Of course you are, dear," Mrs. Thornton said soothingly, as if speaking to a temperamental child. "We're only trying to help. We've all seen how Jack Calder looks at you, and we know how flattering that kind of attention can be. But you must understand, he's a boy playing at being a man. What you need is a real partner, someone established and mature." Charlotte set down her teacup with enough force that it rattled against the saucer. "Jack Calder is 25 years old and has been supporting himself since he was 15. He owns his own horse, earns his own way, and saved my life without hesitation. That sounds rather like a man to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Patterson's mouth had fallen open. Mrs. Clark looked scandalized, and Mrs. Thornton's expression had gone from concern to alarm. "Charlotte," Mrs. Thornton said carefully, "are you developing feelings for that young man?" Was she? Charlotte thought of his letters, his vulnerability, the way he'd looked at her in the wreckage and seen someone worth saving, the way he made her feel alive and seen and valued. "Yes," she said simply. "I believe I am." Mrs. Thornton stood abruptly. "Then I'm afraid we have a serious problem. Charlotte, step outside with me, please. Ladies, excuse us." Charlotte followed the older woman onto the porch, her heart hammering. She'd done it now. Admitted the truth, confirmed their suspicions. There would be consequences. "Are you trying to destroy yourself?" Mrs. Thornton's voice was low and urgent. "Do you have any idea what you're risking? Your position, your reputation, your entire future in this territory?" "I know exactly what I'm risking," Charlotte said quietly. "The question is, what am I risking it for? A life of respectability where I'm alone and miserable? Where I marry some appropriate man I don't love just to satisfy propriety? Better that than scandal and ruin." Mrs. Thornton gripped Charlotte's shoulders. "Listen to me, child. I know you think what you feel for Jack Calder is love, but it's not. It's gratitude mixed with infatuation, intensified by trauma. It will fade, and when it does, you'll be left with nothing but the consequences of your choices." "How do you know it will fade?" Charlotte pulled away. "How can you be so sure?" Mrs. Thornton's expression softened into something like pity. "Because I was you once. 30 years ago, I fell in love with a completely unsuitable man, a gambler, handsome and charming and utterly wrong for me. I ignored everyone's warnings, convinced our love would conquer all obstacles. Do you know what happened?" Charlotte shook her head mutely. He left. 6 months after we married, he left with another woman and every cent I had. I was ruined, divorced, penniless, a scandal. It took me 10 years to rebuild my reputation, to claw my way back to respectability. I married Mr. Thornton out of necessity, not love, because I'd already wasted my heart on someone who didn't deserve it. Mrs. Thornton's eyes were bright with old pain. I'm trying to save you from making my mistake. Charlotte felt the weight of the older woman's experience, the genuine care behind her warnings. But Jack wasn't a gambler or a scoundrel. He was good and honest and brave. I appreciate your concern, Charlotte said carefully. And I'm sorry for what happened to you. But Jack isn't your gambler, and I'm not you. No, you're a 35-year-old woman infatuated with a 25-year-old cowboy who will break your heart. Mrs. Thornton's voice hardened. Charlotte, I'm speaking to you now, not as a friend, but as head of the school board. If you pursue this relationship with Jack Calder, we will have no choice but to terminate your employment. We cannot have our teacher involved in a scandalous affair. There it was. The ultimatum Charlotte had known was coming. You'd fire me for falling in love? We'd fire you for poor judgment and moral impropriety. Those are the terms of your employment, clearly stated in your contract. Mrs. Thornton's expression was implacable. The choice is yours, Charlotte. Your position in Tucson or Jack Calder. You cannot have both. Charlotte walked back to the hotel in a daze, Mrs. Thornton's words echoing in her head. Choose your position or choose Jack. Security or love. Respectability or happiness. When had those things become mutually exclusive? When had wanting both become an impossible dream? Back in her room, Charlotte stood at the window watching the sun track toward the western horizon. It was nearly 4 o'clock. Jack had waited for her at the creek for 2 hours, she realized. Waited and hoped and eventually given up, thinking she'd changed her mind. She had to see him, had to explain, even if it cost her everything. Charlotte changed into her riding clothes, a practical split skirt she'd brought from Boston but never worn. She told Mrs. Thornton she wasn't looking for a husband, that she could take care of herself. It was time to prove it. She rented a horse from the livery, ignoring the stable boy's curious look when she asked for directions to White Star Ranch. The ride would take 2 hours, maybe more. She'd be back after dark, and people would talk. But Charlotte was tired of living her life according to what people would say. The ranch lay northeast of Tucson, across rolling desert dotted with sage and juniper. Charlotte followed the directions carefully, her rented mare picking her way over the rough terrain with steady patience. The sun sank lower, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rust. She almost missed the entrance, a simple wooden arch with White Star Ranch burned into the crossbeam. The road beyond led through a valley where she could see cattle grazing, and in the distance a cluster of buildings that must be the ranch proper. Charlotte's heart hammered as she rode closer. What if Jack wasn't there? What if he was there but refused to see her after she'd stood him up? What if she'd already ruined everything? The ranch house was modest but well-maintained, a low adobe structure with a wide porch. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. A few cowboys lounged near the barn, and they straightened when they saw her approach, clearly surprised by the sight of a woman riding in alone. "Help you, ma'am?" one of them called, an older man with grizzled features she recognized. Jackson, Jack's partner from the rescue. Charlotte reined in her horse, suddenly aware of how improper this was, how scandalous. A respectable woman did not ride alone to a bachelor's ranch at dusk. "I'm looking for Jack Calder," she said, lifting her chin. "Is he here?" Jackson's eyes widened with recognition. "Miss Whitmore, what in blazes are you doing out here alone?" "I need to speak with Jack. It's important." The cowboys exchanged glances. Jackson stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, I'm not sure this is wise. If anyone from town sees you here, let them see." Charlotte dismounted, her legs shaky from the ride. "Please. Is Jack here?" Jackson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "He's out at the north pasture, checking fence line. Should be back any minute. You can wait on the porch if you like. I'll make sure you two have privacy." Charlotte climbed the porch steps and settled onto a weathered bench, her heart racing. The other cowboys drifted away, though she could feel their curious glances. She didn't blame them. She must seem crazy, riding out here alone, risking everything for a man she'd known barely 2 weeks. Maybe she was crazy. Maybe Mrs. Thornton was right, and this was just infatuation born of trauma and gratitude. Then she heard hoofbeats, and Jack rode into the yard on his paint horse. He hadn't seen her yet. His attention on Jackson as the older cowboy intercepted him. They spoke in low tones, Jackson gesturing toward the porch. Charlotte watched Jack's head snap around, his eyes finding her. The expression that crossed his face, shock, hope, confusion, joy, made her breath catch. Jack dismounted in one fluid motion and crossed the yard in long strides. He took the porch steps 2 at a time, stopping a few feet from where she sat. "Charlotte, what are you shouldn't be here. If anyone sees—" "I don't care." Charlotte stood, closing the distance between them, saying, "I don't care who sees or what they say. I needed to see you to explain about this afternoon." Jack's jaw tightened. "You don't owe me an explanation. You had other commitments. I understand." "Do you? Because I don't think you do." Charlotte's voice cracked. "They cornered me, Jack. After church, they invited me to tea at the exact time I was supposed to meet you. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a test. Choose propriety or choose you. And you chose propriety." His voice was flat, carefully emptied of emotion. "At first, yes. Because I was scared. Because I've spent my whole life doing what I was supposed to do, being who I was supposed to be. And look where it got me. Heartbroken and humiliated and running 3,000 miles to start over." Charlotte stepped closer, close enough to see the pain he was trying to hide. "But then, I sat in that suffocating parlor, listening to them tell me I was too old for love, too old to be particular, that I should settle for some respectable man I don't care about just to avoid scandal. And I realized I'd heard it all before. In Boston. From Thomas." Jack's expression shifted. "Who's Thomas?" "The man I loved back east. The man who told me I was too old for him when I finally confessed my feelings. He said he needed someone young, someone who could grow old with him instead of ahead of him." The old shame burned in Charlotte's chest, but she pushed through it. "I let him make me feel worthless. I let him convince me my age made me unlovable. And I fled here thinking I could outrun that shame. But I can't, can I? Because they're saying the same things here. Different words, but the same message. You're too old for Jack Calder. You're too old for passion. You're too old for anything but resignation and settling." "Charlotte." Jack reached for her but stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air between them. "I'm tired of being too old," Charlotte whispered. "I'm tired of being told what I can and can't feel. I'm tired of living small and scared and proper. So I made a choice. I chose to come here. I chose you." Jack's eyes searched her face, storm-gray depths full of wonder and fear. "Do you know what you're saying? What this means? They'll fire you. They'll destroy your reputation." "Let them." Charlotte closed the final distance, her hands finding his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. "I'd rather have one honest moment with you than a lifetime of respectable loneliness." "Charlotte, I'm 25 years old. I have nothing to offer you but a small room in a bunkhouse and a life of hard work and uncertainty. You deserve—" "Don't tell me what I deserve," Charlotte interrupted fiercely. "Everyone keeps telling me what I deserve, what I should want, who I should be. But nobody asks what I actually want. What I want is you, Jack Calder. I want your letters, and your storm-gray eyes, and the way you look at me like I'm something precious. I want your honesty and your kindness, and yes, your age, because you make me feel young again in a way that has nothing to do with years and everything to do with joy." Jack's control cracked. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with heartbreaking gentleness. "You're sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. I won't be able to let you go." "Then don't," Charlotte breathed. "Don't let me go." Jack kissed her like a man who'd been drowning and finally found air. His mouth met hers with a hunger tempered by reverence, claiming and cherishing her all at once. Charlotte melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment, this choice, this impossible, beautiful thing they were building. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I know it's too soon and too fast, and you probably think I'm just a kid who doesn't know his own heart. But I love you, Charlotte Whitmore. I've loved you since you offered to stay and shoot outlaws despite being terrified. Maybe even before that, when you looked at me in the wreckage like I was someone worth knowing. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. God help me, I do. They stood wrapped in each other as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in impossible colors. Charlotte knew the consequences that would follow, the scandal, the job loss, the judgment. But for the first time in years, maybe in her life, she'd chosen from her heart instead of her head. What do we do now? Jack asked quietly. Charlotte pulled back to look at him, memorizing every detail of his face in the dying light. Now? Now you let me be young enough. You said it yourself that first day. Let me be young enough for both of us. Because I'm tired of being the respectable older woman who does everything right. I want to be reckless. I want to be foolish. I want to be in love. Jack's smile was brilliant and heartbreaking. Then stay, tonight. Let me take care of you for once. No scandal yet. I'll have Jackson ride you back to town before dawn, before anyone knows. But give me tonight to show you what this could be. It was madness, impropriety of the highest order, everything Charlotte had been raised to avoid. Yes, she said, show me. Jack led her inside the ranch house, past the curious but tactful stares of the other cowboys. His room was small and spare. A narrow bed, a trunk, a small table with books stacked haphazardly. But it was clean and unmistakably his, smelling of leather and sage and the soap he used. It's not much, Jack said, suddenly uncertain. It's perfect. Charlotte looked around, seeing the life he'd built from nothing. The books proved his claim about reading, volumes on history and poetry and science, well worn from repeated study. A sketch on the wall showed the ranch in charcoal, surprisingly skilled. Did you draw that? In the winter, when there's less work, passes the time. Jack moved to light the lamp, then seemed to think better of it, leaving them in the soft twilight that filtered through the single window. Charlotte, I need you to know I'm not expecting. I don't assume. What I'm trying to say is. Charlotte silenced him with a finger to his lips. I know. That's not why I'm here. I just wanted to be with you, talk with you, without the weight of the world watching. Relief flooded Jack's face. He pulled her to sit beside him on the bed, their hands intertwining naturally. Tell me about Boston, the real Boston, not the pretty version you gave me in the desert. Tell me why you really left. So Charlotte did. She told him about Thomas Ashford, about the years she'd spent hoping he'd notice her, about finally gathering the courage to confess her feelings, only to have them thrown back in her face. She told him about the whispers in the faculty lounge, the pitying looks, the humiliation of being Boston's aging spinster schoolteacher who dared to reach above her station. He was an idiot, Jack said when she finished, his voice tight with anger. A blind, cruel idiot who didn't deserve 5 minutes of your time, let alone your heart. Maybe, but he was also right, wasn't he? I was too old for him, 10 years older, just like I'm 10 years older than you. Jack turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to cradle her face. Charlotte, listen to me. Age is just numbers. What matters is this. He placed her hand over his heart. What matters is how you make me feel. Like I could be more than just another cowboy. Like my thoughts and words and dreams actually matter to someone. You see me, really see me, and that has nothing to do with how many years either of us has lived. But people will always judge us, always say it's wrong. Let them. Jack's thumb brushed her cheek. I don't care what people say. I care about you, about this. If you can handle the talk, so can I. Charlotte leaned into his touch, letting herself believe it might be possible. What if they're right, though? What if this is just infatuation? What if in 6 months or a year, you realize you want someone younger, someone who can give you children and a proper future? Do you want children? The question caught Charlotte off guard. I don't know. I never really considered it possible. But no, I don't think I do. I have teaching. That's enough for me. Good, because I don't want them either. Grew up too hard to want to put a child through this life. But I want you. I want mornings waking up next to you, evenings reading together, dancing at town socials and arguing about books, and building a life that's ours, not what anyone else thinks it should be." Jack's expression was fierce. "And if that changes, if my feelings change, I'll tell you. I promise you that honesty. But Charlotte, I don't think they will. What I feel for you isn't infatuation. It's recognition, like my soul knew yours before we ever met." Charlotte felt tears slip down her cheeks. "How are you so wise at 25? Hard living ages you fast." Jack smiled, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "Besides, wisdom isn't about years. It's about paying attention. And I've been paying attention to you since the moment I pulled you from that wreckage." They talked through the evening, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Jack told her about losing his parents, about the ranch family that had taken him in, about the loneliness of cowboy life, and his dreams of maybe having his own small spread someday. Charlotte told him about her love of teaching, about the joy of seeing a child's face light up when they finally understand something difficult, about her hope of building a real school out here where education mattered. "You could still do that," Jack said. "Even if they fire you in Tucson, there are other towns, other communities that need teachers. We could go somewhere new, start fresh where nobody knows our history." "Run away again?" Charlotte shook her head. "I'm tired of running. If I'm going to be with you, I want to do it honestly. Face the consequences head on. Even if it costs you everything?" Charlotte thought about it, really thought about it. Her teaching position, her reputation, the respect she'd worked so hard to earn. Against that, she weighed what Jack offered: honesty, partnership, a love that saw her for who she really was. "Not everything," she said finally. "It would cost me the things I thought I wanted, but I'd gain the things I actually need." Jack pulled her close, tucking her against his chest, and Charlotte let herself relax into his strength. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond those ridges, Tucson waited with its judgments and expectations. But here, in this small room with this young man who loved her despite every reason not to, Charlotte felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt free. They must have dozed because Charlotte woke to find the room fully dark except for moonlight streaming through the window. Jack was still holding her, his breathing deep and even, and for a moment she simply lay there, memorizing the feeling of safety in his arms. Then she heard voices outside, urgent, worried. Jack woke instantly, his body tensing. "What is it?" Charlotte whispered. Jack was already moving to the window. "Riders coming, fast." He turned to her, his expression grim. "Charlotte, you need to hide. If it's who I think it is—" The door burst open. Jackson stood there, his face pale in the moonlight. "Jack, it's the Daltons. 5 of them, armed and looking for blood. They're at the gate." Charlotte's stomach dropped. The Dalton gang, here, now, because of her. Because she'd stayed when she should have left. Jack was already strapping on his gun belt, his movements efficient and deadly. "Get the men to defensive positions. Charlotte?" He turned to her, and she saw fear flash across his face for the first time since she'd known him. Not fear for himself, but for her. "You stay here. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Promise me." "Jack, no, you can't face them alone." "I won't be alone. I have Jackson and the boys." He gripped her shoulders. "But I need to know you're safe. Please, Charlotte. Promise me you'll stay here." Before Charlotte could answer, a voice rang out from the yard, rough and mocking. "Calder, we know you're in there. Come out and face us like a man, or we'll burn this whole place to the ground." Jack's jaw tightened. He pressed a quick, desperate kiss to Charlotte's lips. "I love you, remember that." Then he was gone, striding out into the night to face 5 killers alone. Charlotte stood frozen for half a second before her survival instincts kicked in. She couldn't just hide while Jack risked his life. She told him she could shoot, that her father had taught her. It was time to prove it. She found a rifle mounted on the wall, probably Jack's spare. Her hands shook as she checked it was loaded, her father's lessons coming back to her through the haze of fear. Safety off, sight down the barrel, breathe steady. Charlotte moved to the window, staying in shadow. In the yard below, she could see Jack walking toward the gate where 5 riders sat on their horses, their faces hidden in darkness. But she could see their weapons glinting in the moonlight. You got a lot of nerve coming here, Jack's voice carried clear in the night air. This is private property. Private property you're going to die on, boy. One of the riders urged his horse forward, the leader, Charlotte guessed. You killed my brother. Shot him down like a dog in the street. Time to pay for that. Your brother drew on me first, Dalton. I defended myself. Any man here would have done the same. Don't matter. Blood demands blood. Now you can come quiet, make it quick, or we can do this the hard way. Burn everything you built and everyone in it. Charlotte's blood ran cold. They'd kill everyone. Jack, Jackson, all the cowboys. And it was because of that day in the saloon, because Jack had defended himself against a Dalton. Jack's hand hovered near his gun. You really want to do this? 5 against 1 aren't good odds for you. I'm faster than your brother was. Dalton laughed, ugly and mean. 5 against 1? Boy, you can't count. We got 6 now. Another rider emerged from the shadows, and Charlotte's breath caught. He was dragging someone, a woman, struggling against his grip. Even in the poor light, Charlotte recognized the expensive dress, the silver hair. Mrs. Thornton. Found this one on the road, the rider called. Said she was coming to check on the new teacher, make sure she got home safe. Imagine our surprise. Jack's whole body went rigid. Let her go. She's got nothing to do with this. She does now. Dalton's voice was full of cruel amusement. Here's how this works, Calder. You come with us quiet, face justice for what you done, and we let the lady go free. You fight, and she dies first, slow and painful. Then we kill everyone else here, burn the ranch, and hunt down that pretty school teacher you've been courting. Your choice. Charlotte's mind raced. Jack would surrender. Of course he would. He'd die before letting innocent people suffer. That was who he was, had always been. Noble and self-sacrificing to a fault. She couldn't let that happen. Charlotte raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel like her father taught her. Her hands were steady now, her breathing calm. She had one shot, maybe literally. If she missed, she'd give away her position and endanger everyone. But if she made it, she might buy Jack enough time to act. She aimed for the rider holding Mrs. Thornton, specifically for his gun hand. A difficult shot in darkness, but not impossible. Charlotte took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle crack split the night. The rider screamed, his gun flying from his shattered hand. Mrs. Thornton wrenched free and ran, stumbling toward the house. All hell broke loose. Jack drew and fired in one fluid motion, hitting another Dalton before they could react. Jackson and the other cowboys opened fire from their positions, bullets flying through the darkness. The Daltons scattered, returning fire, their horses screaming and rearing. Charlotte worked the rifle bolt, taking aim again. Another shot, this one catching a Dalton in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. 3 down, 3 to go. But the leader, Dalton himself, had spotted her muzzle flash. He wheeled his horse around and charged toward the house, gun blazing. Charlotte ducked as bullets shattered the window above her head, glass raining down. She heard Jack shout her name, desperate and terrified, heard his boots pounding toward the house. But Dalton was faster, already at the door, kicking it open. Charlotte swung the rifle up, but Dalton was on her in an instant, slapping it aside. His hand closed around her throat, slamming her against the wall. "So you're the school teacher," he snarled, his breath hot and rancid in her face. "Pretty thing. Shame to waste you, but Calder needs to learn what happens when you cross the Daltons." Charlotte clawed at his hand, her vision starting to gray at the edges. She heard Jack's voice, raw with fury, heard the door slam open again. "Let her go, Dalton. It's me you want." Dalton's hand tightened. "Too late for that, boy. You should have come quiet. Now I'm going to make you watch while I—" He never finished. Charlotte's hand found the small derringer she'd tucked in her boot, the one she'd carried since Boston, the one she'd never thought she'd actually use. She pressed it against Dalton's ribs and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the small room. Dalton's eyes went wide with shock. His grip on her throat loosened, and he stumbled backward, clutching his side. Jack was there in an instant, his gun trained on the wounded outlaw. "It's over, Dalton. Your men are down. You're done." Dalton slumped against the wall, blood spreading across his shirt. He looked at Charlotte with something like respect. "She shot me. The schoolteacher shot me." He laughed, the sound wet and pained. "Didn't see that coming." Charlotte's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Jack hadn't caught her, pulling her against him, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Charlotte, talk to me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice came out hoarse from Dalton's grip. "Jack, I'm fine. Is he—" "He'll live, unfortunately." Jack's voice was hard. "Jackson, get the sheriff. And a doctor for the one still breathing." The next hours passed in a blur. The sheriff arrived with deputies, taking the surviving Daltons into custody. A doctor treated the wounded, including Mrs. Thornton, who was shaken but unharmed. Charlotte sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, giving her statement to the sheriff while Jack hovered nearby, refusing to leave her side. When the officials finally left, taking the prisoners with them, dawn was breaking over the desert. Charlotte found herself alone with Jack and Mrs. Thornton, the older woman staring at her with an expression Charlotte couldn't quite read. "You saved my life," Mrs. Thornton said finally. "You could have stayed hidden, stayed safe, but you risked yourself to save me." "I couldn't let them hurt you." Mrs. Thornton looked between Charlotte and Jack, taking in their proximity, the protective way Jack held Charlotte's hand. "I was wrong about you. About both of you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just trying to control you, to keep you from making the same mistakes I did." She paused, her eyes shining with tears. "But this isn't a mistake, is it? What you have together, it's real." Charlotte squeezed Jack's hand. "Yes, it's real." The older woman nodded slowly. "Then I won't stand in your way. I can't promise the rest of the board will agree, but I'll speak in your favor. What you did tonight, both of you, showed more courage and character than all the propriety in the world." She stood, gathering her dignity around her like a cloak. "I should get back to town before the gossips have a field day. We'll talk later about your position, but Charlotte, thank you. For my life, and for reminding this old woman what love actually looks like." They watched her ride away with the sheriff's escort. Then Jack turned to Charlotte, pulling her into his arms. "You're never doing that again," he said fiercely. "Never putting yourself in danger for me. Do you understand?" Charlotte pulled back to look at him. "I can't promise that. Love means protecting each other, doesn't it? You'd have surrendered yourself to save everyone. I couldn't let you do that alone." "Charlotte, no, Jack. We're partners now, equals. That means I get to be brave and reckless too. You don't get to be the only one who fights." Despite everything, Jack laughed, the sound exhausted but genuine. "God help me, I love you. You're the most stubborn, infuriating, magnificent woman I've ever known." "Good," Charlotte said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Because I'm not going anywhere. They can fire me, they can judge us, they can say whatever they want. But I'm choosing you," Jack called her, "today and every day after." As the sun rose fully over White Star Ranch, painting the desert in gold, Charlotte Whitmore stood in the arms of the man she loved and felt no fear about what came next. She'd faced outlaws and scandal. She'd saved lives and claimed her own happiness. And she'd finally learned that being young enough had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with having the courage to live fully, love honestly, and fight for what mattered most. The ride back to Tucson that morning felt like traveling between two different worlds. Charlotte sat beside Jackson on the wagon bench, her body aching from the night's violence, her throat bruised where Dalton had gripped it. Jack rode alongside on his paint horse, close enough that she could reach out and touch him if she dared, but the approaching town made such gestures impossible. They could see the church steeple rising in the distance, and Charlotte felt her stomach clench with nerves. What awaited her in Tucson? The school board had already warned her away from Jack, and now she'd spent the entire night at his ranch. Never mind that she'd been fighting outlaws and saving lives. The gossips would see only impropriety. "You don't have to face them alone," Jack said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I'll come with you, stand beside you when you talk to the board." Charlotte looked at him, this young man who'd already sacrificed so much for her, who was ready to sacrifice even more. The morning light caught his profile, illuminating the determined set of his jaw, the shadows of exhaustion under his eyes. He'd barely slept, keeping watch over her through what remained of the night, and now he was prepared to walk into the lion's den at her side. "No," she said gently. "This is my fight. If we're going to have any chance of building a life here, I need to face them myself. Show them I'm not some helpless woman who needs a man to defend her choices." Jack's hands tightened on his reins. Charlotte, trust me, she interrupted. Please, trust that I can handle this. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw the struggle playing out behind his storm-gray eyes, the desire to protect her warring with respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded. All right, but I'll be at the hotel if you need me. One word, and I'm there. They entered Tucson just after 8 in the morning, and Charlotte could feel the weight of every eye on the street. Word had clearly spread about the attack on the ranch, about Mrs. Thornton's rescue, about the new schoolteacher who'd apparently spent the night at White Star Ranch. Shopkeepers paused in sweeping their storefronts to stare. Women clustered in doorways, whispering behind their hands. Even the children seemed to sense the scandal in the air, their play faltering as the wagon rolled past. Jackson pulled up in front of the hotel, and Charlotte climbed down on legs that felt like water. Jack dismounted, moving to help her, but she shook her head slightly. Not here, not with everyone watching. Thank you, she said formally to both men, for ensuring my safe return. Miss Whitmore, Jackson said with equal formality, though his eyes were kind. You take care now. Jack said nothing, but the look he gave her spoke volumes. Love and pride and worry all tangled together. Then he touched his hat brim in that gesture she'd come to treasure and rode away toward the livery. Charlotte stood alone on the dusty street, feeling the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked into the hotel. The clerk's eyes widened when he saw her. Miss Whitmore! Thank God you're safe. We heard about the attack, about Mrs. Thornton. Is it true you shot one of the Dalton gang? So that detail had spread already. Charlotte managed a tight smile. It's true. Is the school board convening today? They're meeting right now, ma'am, in the town hall. Mrs. Thornton sent word first thing this morning that they needed to discuss your situation. Of course they were. Charlotte thanked him and headed to her room just long enough to wash her face and change into a clean dress. The one she'd worn to the ranch was torn and blood-stained, evidence of the night's violence. She chose her most severe outfit, high-necked, dark gray, her hair pulled back ruthlessly. If they were going to judge her, let them see a woman who could meet their judgment without flinching. The walk to the town hall felt like a march to her execution. More whispers, more stares. Charlotte kept her eyes forward and her head high. She'd survived an outlaw attack and a stagecoach ambush. She could survive a school board meeting. The town hall was a simple wooden building at the end of Main Street. Charlotte pushed through the door and found the board already assembled. Horace Pemberton, Reverend Walsh, Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Clark, and Mrs. Thornton, who looked exhausted but determined. They all turned when Charlotte entered, their expressions ranging from disapproval to curiosity to, in Mrs. Thornton's case, something that might have been respect. Miss Whitmore, Horace began, his voice heavy with formality. Thank you for joining us. Please, sit. Charlotte took the indicated chair, feeling like a defendant at trial. In a way, she supposed she was. I'm sure you're aware, Horace continued, that we've received some concerning reports about your activities last night. You were seen leaving town alone, riding to White Star Ranch. You spent the entire night there, in the company of Jack Calder and his men, without a chaperone or any regard for propriety. I'm aware of how it looks, Charlotte said evenly, but perhaps you'd like to hear what actually happened before you pass judgment. Reverend Walsh leaned forward, his expression stern. We've heard Mrs. Thornton's account of the attack. We know you acted bravely, but that doesn't excuse the impropriety of your presence there in the first place. Doesn't it? Charlotte met his eyes steadily. I went to the ranch to speak with Jack Calder about a personal matter. While I was there, the Dalton gang attacked. Would you have preferred I rode back to town alone in the dark, leaving Mrs. Thornton to her fate? Or should I have hidden while Jack and his men faced 5 armed outlaws? You should never have been there in the first place, Mrs. Patterson cut in sharply. A respectable woman does not visit a bachelor's ranch alone, especially after we explicitly warned you about that young man. And there it is, Charlotte said quietly. This isn't really about propriety or my conduct, is it? This is about Jack, about the fact that I've chosen to care for someone you deem unsuitable. Mrs. Clark's face flushed. He's 10 years younger than you, Miss Whitmore. The scandal of it. The scandal of what, exactly? Charlotte's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. The scandal of a 25-year-old man and a 35-year-old woman caring for each other, of finding connection and partnership despite what society says we should feel? It's unnatural, Mrs. Patterson declared. Women of your age don't consort with boys barely out of adolescence. It's unseemly. Charlotte felt something crack inside her. All the years of being told she was too old, too unmarriageable, too past her prime. All the shame she'd carried from Boston, from Thomas Ashford's rejection, from a lifetime of society's expectations. Unseemly, she repeated, her voice shaking. Do you know what's unseemly? Telling a woman she's too old for love, too old for passion, too old for anything but quiet resignation and settling for whatever scraps of affection might come her way. That's what's unseemly, and I'm done accepting it. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Only Mrs. Thornton was nodding slowly, as if Charlotte was finally saying what she'd been thinking all along. Jack Calder is a good man, Charlotte continued, the words pouring out now like water from a broken dam. He's brave and kind and thoughtful. He saved my life without hesitation, then risked his own to protect all of us from the Dalton gang. He reads poetry and philosophy. He looks at me like I'm the most remarkable woman in the world, not like I'm some aging spinster who should be grateful for any attention. And yes, he's younger than me, but that doesn't make our feelings less real or less worthy of respect. Miss Whitmore, Horace said heavily, we understand you have feelings for this young man, but you must understand our position. We hired you to be an example to our children, to uphold certain standards of behavior. How can you teach our daughters propriety when you yourself flaunt it so brazenly? I'm teaching them something far more valuable, Charlotte shot back. I'm teaching them that a woman's worth isn't determined by her age or marital status, that she can be brave and capable and make her own choices, that love is something to pursue honestly, not something to hide or be ashamed of. Reverend Walsh shook his head sadly. Those are fine sentiments, Miss Whitmore, but they're not the values this community hired you to instill. I'm afraid we have no choice but to— Wait. Mrs. Thornton's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Every head turned toward her. Before we make any decisions, I think there's something you all need to hear. She stood, moving to stand beside Charlotte's chair. The gesture of solidarity was unmistakable. Last night, Mrs. Thornton began, her voice steady and clear. I rode out to White Star Ranch to confront Charlotte about her relationship with Jack Calder. I was convinced she was making a terrible mistake, throwing away her future for a foolish infatuation. I was going to demand she end things immediately or face immediate termination. Charlotte's breath caught. She hadn't known Mrs. Thornton's original purpose in coming to the ranch. On my way there, Mrs. Thornton continued, I was intercepted by the Dalton gang. They dragged me to the ranch as leverage, planning to force Jack Calder to surrender himself or watch me die. I was certain my life was over. She paused, her voice thickening with emotion. But Charlotte Whitmore, this woman we're sitting here judging for impropriety, risked her own life to save mine. She could have hidden. She could have stayed safe. Instead, she picked up a rifle and shot a man to save someone who had come there specifically to ruin her happiness. The room was utterly silent. After it was over, Mrs. Thornton went on, after the danger had passed, I watched Charlotte and Jack together. And you know what I saw? Not a scandal, not some improper dalliance. I saw two people who genuinely love each other, who bring out the best in one another, who face danger and difficulty as true partners. She looked around at the other board members. I was wrong. We've all been wrong. We've been so concerned with appearances and propriety that we've forgotten what actually matters. Character, courage, love. Mrs. Patterson was shaking her head. Adelaide, I understand you're grateful, but that doesn't change the facts. The age difference alone is irrelevant, Mrs. Thornton said firmly. My husband was 15 years older than me when we married. No one questioned that. But reverse the genders, make the woman older, and suddenly it's a scandal? That's not morality, that's hypocrisy. Horace cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even so, the perception will be what we make it, Mrs. Thornton interrupted. If we stand behind Charlotte, If we make it clear that we value her teaching and her character over gossip and small-minded judgment, the community will follow our lead. But if we cave to prejudice and fire her for the crime of falling in love with a good man, we'll be the ones who should be ashamed. Charlotte felt tears pricking her eyes. She'd expected Mrs. Thornton to condemn her, not defend her. Not after everything that had been said between them. Reverend Walsh was wavering. Charlotte could see it in his expression. "I don't know, Adelaide. This is unprecedented. The scandal will fade," Mrs. Thornton said. "Scandals always do. But Charlotte's ability as a teacher, her dedication to our children, her bravery in the face of danger, those things are lasting. Are we really going to throw all of that away because she dared to love someone we think is too young for her?" The board members looked at each other, uncertainty written across their faces. Charlotte held her breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine her entire future in Tucson. Finally, Horace spoke. "Perhaps we should put it to a vote. All in favor of retaining Miss Whitmore as our teacher, despite the complications of her personal life." Mrs. Thornton's hand shot up immediately. After a long moment, Mrs. Clark raised hers as well, though she looked pained about it. Charlotte waited, heart hammering, for the others. Reverend Walsh sighed deeply. "I have reservations, serious reservations, but I also believe in forgiveness and second chances. And what Charlotte did last night, saving Adelaide, fighting those outlaws, that took tremendous courage." His hand rose slowly. "I vote to retain her." 3-2. Charlotte's eyes flew to Mrs. Patterson and Horace, the holdouts. Mrs. Patterson's face was set in lines of disapproval, but Horace looked deeply conflicted. "I built this school system on principles," he said slowly, "principles of morality and proper behavior. But perhaps Adelaide is right. Perhaps I've confused propriety with actual virtue." He looked directly at Charlotte. "Miss Whitmore, if we allow you to stay, will you at least attempt discretion in your relationship with Mr. Calder? Not hide it, but perhaps not flaunt it either." Charlotte nodded quickly. "Of course, we never intended to be inappropriate. We just wanted the chance to see where our feelings might lead." Horace studied her for another long moment, then raised his hand. "Then I vote to retain her as well." 4-1. Charlotte could barely breathe. They were letting her stay. Against all odds, despite everything, they were giving her a chance. Mrs. Patterson stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is a mistake. Mark my words, this will come back to haunt us all. But I see I'm outvoted." She gathered her things with sharp, angry movements. "I wash my hands of this entire affair." She swept from the room, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. Horace cleared his throat. "Well, that's settled then. Miss Whitmore, you'll continue as our teacher, but I must ask, do you intend to marry Mr. Calder? Because if this relationship is to continue, perhaps it would be best to formalize it sooner rather than later." Marriage. Charlotte hadn't even thought that far ahead. She and Jack had barely begun, had only just admitted their feelings. But looking around at the board members' expectant faces, she realized they needed that assurance, needed to believe this was heading somewhere respectable. We haven't discussed it," Charlotte admitted. "But if Jack were to ask, I would certainly consider it." It wasn't quite the commitment they wanted, but it seemed to satisfy them. Horace nodded. "Very well. School resumes tomorrow as scheduled. We'll expect you to maintain your usual standards of excellence in the classroom, regardless of your personal situation." "Of course." Charlotte stood on shaky legs. "Thank you, all of you, for giving me this chance." Mrs. Thornton walked her to the door, her hand gentle on Charlotte's elbow. "Come to dinner tonight," she said quietly. "You and Jack. Let the town see that we support you, that this isn't some sordid secret. If we're going to do this, we do it openly." Charlotte felt her throat tighten with gratitude. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Mrs. Thornton squeezed her arm. "You saved my life, child. The least I can do is help save your reputation. Besides, I meant what I said in there. What you and Jack have is real. I can see that now." Charlotte left the town hall feeling like she was walking on air. She'd kept her position. She'd won the board's grudging acceptance, and now she had to find Jack and tell him everything. She found him at the hotel, pacing the lobby like a caged animal. He spun around when she entered, his face a mask of barely controlled anxiety. "Well?" he demanded. "What happened?" Charlotte couldn't help it. She smiled, wide and bright and utterly joyful. "I still have my job. The board voted to keep me, 4-1. Jack's expression transformed from worry to disbelief to pure elation. He crossed the lobby in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Charlotte laughed, clinging to his shoulders, aware of the clerk's scandalized gasp, but not caring at all. "They accepted it?" Jack set her down but kept his hands on her waist, his eyes searching her face. "They're letting you stay? Letting us be together?" "With conditions," Charlotte warned. "We're supposed to be discreet. Not hide, but not be inappropriate either. And Horace strongly suggested we consider marriage sooner rather than later." Jack's hands tightened on her waist. "Marriage," he repeated softly. "Charlotte, I know we've only known each other a short time. I know by all rights I should wait, court you properly, do this the right way. But I can't think of anything I want more than to make you my wife." Charlotte's heart stuttered in her chest. "Jack, I'm not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet. Not until I can do it right, with a ring and the proper words. But I'm telling you now, that's where this is heading for me, toward forever, if you'll have me." Charlotte cupped his face in her hands, this young man who'd turned her world upside down in the best possible way. "Ask me in a month," she whispered, "after we've had time to really know each other, to be sure this isn't just the intensity of everything we've been through. If you still feel the same way then, ask me, and I'll say yes." Jack's smile was brilliant enough to light up the entire territory. "A month," he agreed. "I can wait a month." They stood there in the hotel lobby, holding each other, until the clerk's pointed cough reminded them they had an audience. Jack stepped back reluctantly, putting proper distance between them once more. "Mrs. Thornton invited us to dinner tonight," Charlotte said. "Both of us. She wants to show the town that she supports us." Jack's eyebrows rose. "The same Mrs. Thornton who warned you away from me just days ago?" "The same. She's had a change of heart. Apparently saving someone's life goes a long way toward earning their goodwill." "Then I'd better get cleaned up and presentable." Jack touched her cheek gently. "Charlotte, I'm so proud of you. For standing up to them, for fighting for us. You're the bravest woman I've ever known." Charlotte leaned into his touch. "I'm learning from a good teacher." The dinner at Mrs. Thornton's that evening was both nerve-wracking and strangely wonderful. The older woman welcomed them warmly, introducing Jack to her husband, a quiet, kind man who seemed genuinely pleased to meet the cowboy who'd saved his wife's life. Other guests arrived as well, carefully chosen supporters who Mrs. Thornton had clearly enlisted to help shift public opinion. Charlotte watched Jack navigate the social situation with surprising grace. He was quiet, respectful, but not servile. When asked about the ranch, he spoke intelligently about cattle breeding and land management. When the conversation turned to books, a test, Charlotte suspected, he held his own, discussing Mark Twain and James Fenimore Cooper with genuine enthusiasm. But it was a moment near the end of the evening that truly won over the remaining skeptics. One of the guests, Mr. Henderson, asked Jack directly about his intentions toward Charlotte. Jack didn't hesitate. "I intend to marry her, sir, if she'll have me. I know I'm young. I know I don't have much to offer beyond a small room at a ranch and a life of hard work. But I love Charlotte with everything I am, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving she made the right choice in giving me a chance." The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at Charlotte as he spoke, made several of the women tear up. Even Mr. Henderson, a hard-nosed businessman known for his skepticism, nodded approvingly. "That's all any of us can promise, son," he said. "Love and effort. Sounds like you've got both." After that, the evening shifted. People stopped treating Jack like a curiosity or a scandal and started treating him like one of them. They asked his opinion, included him in their conversations, and by the time the dinner ended, Charlotte could feel the tide of public opinion beginning to turn. As Jack walked her back to the hotel, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Thornton for appearances, Charlotte felt hope blooming in her chest. They weren't out of the woods yet. There would still be gossip, still be judgment, but they had support now. They had allies. At the hotel door, with Mrs. Thornton discreetly turned away, Jack squeezed Charlotte's hand. 1 month, he whispered, and then I'm going to ask you properly, going to give you the proposal you deserve. I'll be counting the days, Charlotte whispered back. She watched him ride away into the darkness, her heart full to bursting. Tomorrow she'd return to teaching, face her students and their parents with her head held high. Tomorrow she'd begin building the life she wanted, not the one others expected of her. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply feel the joy of being loved, the relief of being accepted, the wonder of finding exactly what she'd been looking for in the last place she'd expected. Charlotte climbed the stairs to her room, pulled out her writing paper, and began a letter to her cousin in Boston, the only family member who'd supported her decision to go west. She wanted to tell someone about Jack, about the attack, about standing up to the school board and winning. But as she wrote, describing the young cowboy who'd stolen her heart, Charlotte realized something profound. She wasn't writing to justify her choices or seek approval. She was writing to share her joy, to celebrate the unexpected beautiful thing that had bloomed in the Arizona desert. For the first time in her 35 years, Charlotte Whitmore was living entirely for herself. And it felt absolutely right. The next morning, Charlotte stood before her classroom full of students, aware that many of them had heard the gossip, that their parents had probably discussed the scandal over breakfast. But when she began her lesson on American history, the children responded with their usual enthusiasm, and Charlotte felt herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of teaching. At lunch, several of the mothers appeared to pick up their children, ostensibly for a meal at home, but Charlotte knew they were really there to evaluate her, to see if the scandal had changed her somehow. She met each one with calm professionalism, discussing their children's progress, offering strategies for helping with homework. Mrs. Henderson lingered after the others had left. "Miss Whitmore," she said carefully, "I want you to know that my husband and I support you. What you did at the ranch, saving Mrs. Thornton, fighting those outlaws, that took real courage. And Mr. Calder seems like a fine young man." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means more than you know." "There will always be gossips," the older woman continued. "People who have nothing better to do than criticize others. But those of us with sense can see what's really happening here. You're a good teacher and a good woman. Don't let the small-minded folks make you doubt that." As the week progressed, Charlotte found that Mrs. Henderson's words were prophetic. There were still whispers, still pointed looks from certain quarters. Mrs. Patterson made a show of pulling her daughter from Charlotte's class, though the girl was reassigned to her by the other board members within days. But more and more, the town seemed willing to accept Charlotte and Jack's relationship, especially as Jack made a point of attending church every Sunday and behaving with perfect propriety in public. Their stolen moments became precious. A brief conversation after church, his hand brushing hers as he helped her into a wagon for a community picnic, secret smiles across crowded rooms. Jack was patient, giving Charlotte the space to establish herself professionally while making it clear to everyone that his intentions were serious and honorable. 3 weeks into their unofficial courtship, Jack appeared at the schoolhouse after classes had ended, his hat in his hands and an expression of barely contained excitement on his face. "Charlotte, I need to show you something. Can you ride out with me, just for an hour or so?" Charlotte glanced around the empty classroom, knowing that leaving alone with Jack would spark fresh gossip. But she was tired of living in fear of what people might say. "Let me get my things." They rode out of town together, Jack leading her northeast along a route she didn't recognize. After about 30 minutes, they crested a rise and Charlotte gasped. Below them lay a small valley, green with cottonwoods clustered around a creek. The land was relatively flat, perfect for building, with good water access and shelter from the worst of the desert winds. It was beautiful, peaceful, like something from a dream. "What is this place?" Charlotte asked. Jack dismounted and helped her down from her borrowed mare. "This is mine," he said quietly. "Or it will be. I've been saving for years and I finally had enough to buy it. 160 acres of good grazing land, water rights to the creek, and enough flat space to build a house." Charlotte's breath caught. "Jack, it's beautiful." "I bought it for us," he said, turning to face her. "I know I said I'd wait a month to propose. I know we agreed to take our time. But Charlotte, I've been thinking about this every day since the attack. I'm sure. More sure than I've ever been about anything. He dropped to one knee right there in the desert grass, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, Charlotte saw a simple gold band with a modest diamond. Nothing extravagant, but clearly chosen with care. "Charlotte Whitmore," Jack said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "I know I'm young. I know I don't have much to offer except this land and my love. But I promise you, I will spend every day of my life making you happy. I'll build us a home here, a place where we can be ourselves without judgment. I'll support your teaching, your dreams, everything you want to accomplish, and I'll love you with everything I am, for as long as I live." Tears streamed down Charlotte's face. She'd imagined this moment, but the reality was so much more than she'd dreamed. "So I'm asking you now, 3 weeks early, because I can't wait another minute. Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me?" Charlotte dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes," Jack called her. "I'll marry you. I'll build a life with you. I choose you, today and always." Jack's whoop of joy echoed across the valley. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Jack slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They sat in the grass together, Jack's arm around Charlotte's shoulders, looking out over their future home. Charlotte thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from Boston's disappointment to Arizona's danger, from shame to joy, from resignation to hope. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked softly. Charlotte leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. "I'm thinking that I spent so many years believing I was too old for this, too old for love, for adventure, for new beginnings. But you taught me something important," Jack called her. "What's that?" Charlotte smiled up at him, her heart full to overflowing. "You taught me that age is just a number. What matters is how alive you feel, how open your heart is, how willing you are to take risks for what matters. And right now, at 35, I feel younger than I ever did at 25. Because I'm finally living for myself, finally choosing my own happiness." Jack kissed her forehead tenderly. "Then let me be young enough for both of us," he whispered, echoing the words he'd spoken that first desperate day in the desert. "Let me be young enough to believe we can build something beautiful here. Young enough to face whatever challenges come with joy instead of fear. Young enough to love you the way you deserve to be loved." "You already are," Charlotte said. "You always have been." As the sun began to set over their valley, painting the sky in impossible colors, Charlotte Whitmore sat in the arms of her young cowboy and felt something she'd never felt before. Complete and utter certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with. The gossips could talk, the doubters could judge. The world could think whatever it wanted about a 35-year-old schoolteacher and a 25-year-old cowboy. None of it mattered. Because here, in this beautiful valley that would become their home, Charlotte and Jack were writing their own story. And it was going to be magnificent. The announcement of their engagement sent ripples through Tucson like a stone dropped in still water. Charlotte wore Jack's ring openly now, the modest diamond catching the light as she taught her lessons, as she walked through town, as she went about her daily life. Some people smiled and offered congratulations. Others whispered and shook their heads. But Charlotte found that she didn't care nearly as much as she'd thought she would. Mrs. Thornton threw them an engagement party at her home, inviting the entire town in a bold statement of support. Charlotte stood beside Jack in the Thorntons' parlor, greeting guests with her head held high. Some came out of genuine goodwill, others out of curiosity, but they came. And slowly, gradually, Charlotte felt the town's resistance beginning to soften. "You look happy," Mrs. Henderson observed, sipping punch and watching Charlotte with warm eyes. "Truly happy. I don't think I've ever seen you smile like this." Charlotte glanced across the room to where Jack stood talking with some ranchers, his easy confidence growing as he realized these men accepted him as an equal. "I am happy. Happier than I've ever been." "Good. You deserve it, dear. Both of you do." Mrs. Henderson patted her arm. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But not everyone was convinced. As the evening wore on, Charlotte overheard a conversation between two women she didn't recognize well, Visitors from a neighboring town, perhaps, or rarely seen residents. It's unseemly, one muttered, thinking she was out of earshot. A woman her age with a boy like that? What can she possibly offer him? My thoughts exactly, the other agreed. Mark my words, in a year or two he'll realize his mistake. He'll want children, a proper family, and she'll be too old to give him that. Then where will they be? Charlotte's smile faltered. The words struck deeper than she'd expected, hitting the fears she'd been trying to ignore. What if they were right? What if Jack did wake up one day and regret choosing her? What if her age became a wedge between them after all? Jack appeared at her elbow as if summoned by her distress. Charlotte, what's wrong? She forced brightness into her expression. Nothing, just tired, I think. But Jack knew her too well already. His eyes searched her face, then flicked to the two gossiping women. His jaw tightened. What did they say? It doesn't matter. It does if it's hurting you. Jack took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Charlotte, talk to me. She led him out onto the porch where they could have privacy. The night air was cool and clean, stars brilliant overhead. Charlotte leaned against the railing, trying to find the words for the fear gnawing at her heart. They said you'll regret this, she finally whispered. That in a year or two, you'll want children and a proper family, and I'll be too old to give you that. And Jack, what if they're right? What if you wake up one day and realize you've tied yourself to a woman who can't give you everything a younger wife could? Jack's expression shifted from concern to something fiercer, a determination that bordered on anger, though she knew it wasn't directed at her. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? He asked, his voice low and intense. I see a woman who faced down outlaws to save a stranger. I see someone who stood up to a school board and an entire town to fight for what she believed in. I see my best friend, my partner, the person I want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of my life. He cupped her face in his hands. I don't see your age, Charlotte. I never have. I see you. But children, I told you I don't want children, and I meant it. I want you, just you. A quiet life in our valley, teaching during the day, reading together at night, building something that's ours. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. If that changes, if someday I feel differently, I'll tell you. We'll figure it out together. But Charlotte, I need you to hear me. I'm not settling. I'm not making do. I'm choosing exactly what I want. And what I want is you. Charlotte pulled him close, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. I'm sorry. I shouldn't doubt you, doubt us. You're allowed to have fears. God knows I have them too. Jack's arms tightened around her. I'm terrified I'm not good enough for you, that you'll realize you could have had someone educated and cultured, someone who can give you the life you deserve. But then I remember how you look at me, and I think maybe, just maybe, I'm enough. Charlotte pulled back to look at him. You're more than enough. You're everything. They stood together under the stars, holding each other, letting the doubts and fears drain away. When they returned to the party, Charlotte's smile was genuine again, and she wore her engagement ring like armor against the whispers. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning. They set the wedding date for early October, giving them just enough time to prepare. Jack spent every spare moment working on their house in the valley, a modest 2-room cabin to start, with plans to expand later. Charlotte balanced her teaching duties with wedding preparations, determined to prove that marriage wouldn't diminish her dedication to her students. But as the date approached, Charlotte found herself facing an unexpected challenge. The school board called another meeting, and this time the discussion centered on what would happen after the wedding. The contract clearly states that teachers must reside in Tucson, Horace Pemberton said, looking uncomfortable. But your new home with Jack is 15 miles away. That's too far to commute daily, especially in winter. Charlotte's stomach sank. She'd been so focused on the wedding itself that she hadn't thought through the logistics. I could board in town during the week, she suggested, return to the valley on weekends. Mrs. Thornton shook her head gently. That's not really fair to you or to Jack, dear. Newlyweds should be together, not separated 5 days a week. Then what are you suggesting? Charlotte asked, though she feared she already knew. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat. We're suggesting that perhaps it's time to accept that you can't do both. Be a wife to Jack, build your home together. We'll find another teacher for Tucson." The room spun slightly. Teaching wasn't just what Charlotte did, it was who she was. The thought of giving it up, of losing that part of herself, made her chest tighten with panic. "There must be another solution," she said, hearing the desperation in her voice. "I'm a good teacher. The children are thriving. Surely we can find a way to make this work." "Well, what if," Mrs. Thornton said slowly, "what if Charlotte started a school in her own community? There are several families in the ranching areas northeast of here. Their children have no access to education. Charlotte could teach them." Hope flickered in Charlotte's chest. "I could do that. I could teach from our home, serve the families in the valley and surrounding areas." Horace frowned. "But who would pay her? Those ranching families are spread out, likely too poor to afford a private teacher." "The Territorial Education Fund," Mrs. Thornton said firmly. "We could apply for a grant, establish Charlotte as a frontier teacher serving underserved communities. It's exactly the kind of initiative the territory wants to support." Charlotte looked at Mrs. Thornton with gratitude and wonder. The older woman had become her greatest ally, working tirelessly to help Charlotte build the life she wanted. After much discussion, the board agreed to support the proposal. Charlotte would finish the current term in Tucson, then transition to teaching in the valley after her marriage. It wasn't perfect. She'd miss her current students, miss the established school, but it was a compromise that let her keep both her career and her marriage. When Charlotte told Jack that evening, his reaction surprised her. "You were willing to give it up," he said quietly. "Teaching. For me." "Of course. You're my future, Jack." He shook his head, pulling her into his arms. "No, teaching is part of who you are. I would never ask you to sacrifice that. Never." He kissed her forehead. "We're partners, Charlotte. That means we both get to keep the things that make us who we are. We just figure out how to make it work together." Charlotte felt her love for him deepen even further. This was what she'd been searching for her whole life. Someone who saw her completely, valued all of her, and refused to ask her to diminish herself. The wedding day arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear, the sky an impossible blue. Charlotte stood in Mrs. Thornton's guest room, looking at herself in the mirror. Her dress was simple but elegant, cream-colored silk that she'd sewn herself with help from several town women who'd warmed to her over the months. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, threaded with tiny wildflowers Jack had picked from their valley. At 35, she didn't look young. The lines around her eyes were visible, the gray streaks in her hair evident in the bright morning light. But Charlotte found she didn't mind anymore. These were marks of a life lived, of experiences survived, of wisdom earned, and Jack loved her exactly as she was. Mrs. Thornton knocked and entered, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "Oh, Charlotte, you're beautiful." "I'm nervous," Charlotte admitted. "Not about marrying Jack. I've never been more certain of anything, but about everything else. The town watching, judging, waiting to see if we fail." Mrs. Thornton took her hands. "Let them watch. Let them judge. You and Jack have already proven that what you have is real. Today isn't about convincing them of anything. Today is about celebrating your love." She paused, her expression growing serious. "I owe you an apology, Charlotte. When you first arrived, I tried to control you, to force you into the mold of what I thought you should be. I was wrong. You've taught me that there are many ways to live a good life, many kinds of love worth celebrating. Thank you for that lesson." Charlotte hugged her tightly. "Thank you for coming around, for standing by us when it mattered most." The ceremony was held in the town church, packed with more people than Charlotte had expected. Some came to support them. Others probably came hoping for scandal or spectacle. But Charlotte barely noticed the crowd. The moment she stepped through the doors and saw Jack waiting at the altar, the rest of the world faded away. He looked heartbreakingly handsome in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes locked on her with such love and wonder that Charlotte's breath caught. As she walked down the aisle, alone, because she had no father to give her away and refused to pretend otherwise, Jack's expression grew increasingly emotional. When she reached him, he whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony with surprising warmth. He'd been one of the skeptics initially, but he seemed to have genuinely accepted their union. When he asked if anyone objected to the marriage, Charlotte held her breath, but the church remained silent. Then came the vows. Jack went first, his voice steady and clear. Charlotte, when I pulled you from that wrecked stagecoach, I thought I was just doing what any decent man would do. But you looked at me like I was something more than just another cowboy, and in that moment, my whole life changed. You've taught me that love isn't about age or social standing or what other people think. It's about finding someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your home. I promise to support your dreams, celebrate your victories, and stand by you through every challenge. I promise to love you exactly as you are, for as long as I live. Charlotte's turn came, and she had to pause to collect herself, overwhelmed by emotion. Jack, I came to Arizona running from shame and disappointment, convinced I was too old for new beginnings, too broken for happiness. But you showed me I was wrong. You looked at me and saw not my age or my past mistakes, but my strength, my courage, my worth. You made me feel young again, not because you are young, but because you taught me to embrace life with joy instead of fear. I promise to be your equal partner, to fight beside you, to build a life with you that's honest and true. I promise to love you with everything I am, today and always. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Jack pulled Charlotte into a kiss that was both tender and passionate, holding nothing back despite their audience. The church erupted in applause, genuine, warm applause that suggested the town had finally, truly accepted them. The reception was held in the town square, with tables laden with food and a small band playing cheerful music. Charlotte danced with Jack, with Horace, with Jackson, and the other White Star Ranch hands who'd become friends. She laughed more than she had in years, feeling light and free, and utterly happy. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, Jack pulled her aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Calder?" Charlotte's heart swelled at the name. Mrs. Calder. She was Mrs. Jack Calder now, partner to a cowboy, builder of a new life. More than ready. They rode out together toward their valley, their new home, leaving the celebration behind. The cabin Jack had built waited for them, small but sturdy, with a porch facing west to catch the sunset and a garden plot Charlotte had already started planning. Inside, Jack had surprised her with bookshelves lining one entire wall, empty now, but waiting to be filled with the books they'd collect together. "I figured a teacher needs books," he said, looking almost shy. "And I wanted you to know that your teaching matters here too, that we're building a home where learning and growing are valued." Charlotte turned to him, this young man who understood her so completely, who'd given her everything she needed without her even having to ask. "Make love to me," she whispered. "My husband." Jack swept her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold of their new home. They'd waited, through propriety and planning and endless anticipation, and now finally, they could truly belong to each other. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a perfect blend of Jack's youthful enthusiasm and Charlotte's more experienced touch. They learned each other slowly, mapping every inch of skin, every place that made the other gasp or sigh. And when they finally came together completely, Charlotte felt something shift deep in her soul, a settling, a rightness, a coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, the windows open to let in the cool desert night and the sound of the creek bubbling nearby. "No regrets?" Jack asked quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Charlotte propped herself up to look at him. "Not a single one. You?" "Just that I didn't find you sooner," he smiled. "Think of all the time we wasted not knowing each other existed. Maybe we weren't ready sooner. Maybe we both needed to become who we are before we could find each other." Charlotte kissed him softly. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, the future stretching before them full of possibility. The months that followed were among the happiest of Charlotte's life. She established her school in the valley, teaching children from the surrounding ranches in a small schoolroom Jack built onto their cabin. The families were grateful, the children eager to learn, and Charlotte found a deep satisfaction in bringing education to a community that had gone without. Jack worked the land, building their herd, expanding their home bit by bit. In the evenings, they'd sit together on the porch, reading aloud to each other, or simply talking, planning, dreaming. They visited Tucson regularly, attending church and social events, slowly cementing their place in the community as a respectable married couple. But it was the quiet moments Charlotte treasured most. Mornings waking up in Jack's arms, the early light streaming through their window. Evenings cooking together, Jack telling her about his day while she graded papers. Nights making love with increasing confidence and joy, learning to please each other in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with genuine connection. Winter came, and with it challenges. A harsh storm that threatened their livestock. A difficult birth in their small herd that had Jack up all night in the barn. A student's family facing hardship that Charlotte worked to help address. But they faced everything together, partners in truth as well as name. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire reading, Charlotte looked up from her book to find Jack watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, smiling. "I was just thinking about something someone said at our engagement party, about how I'd regret marrying you, want things you couldn't give me." His voice was thoughtful, not upset. "And I realized they were right about one thing." Charlotte's heart clenched. "Jack, there are things you can't give me," he continued. "You can't give me youth, but I don't want it. You can't give me children, but I don't need them. You can't give me a conventional life where no one questions our choices, but I wouldn't trade what we have for all the approval in the world." He set down his book and crossed to kneel in front of her chair. "What you can give me, what you do give me every single day, is so much more valuable. You give me partnership, respect, challenge, joy. You make me want to be better, smarter, kinder. You see the best in me and refuse to let me settle for less." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "You do the same for me." "Then we're even." Jack took her hands. "I know people still talk. I know some folks think we're odd or wrong or doomed to fail. But Charlotte, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're my choice, today, tomorrow, and every day after. And I'd make that choice again and again, no matter what anyone says." Charlotte pulled him up into her lap, kissing him deeply. "I love you," Jack called her. "My young, wise, impossible husband. I love you too. My brave, brilliant, beautiful wife." They made love there in front of the fire, slow and tender and perfect. And afterward, Charlotte realized something profound. She'd spent so much of her life worried about being too old for love, too old for adventure, too old for new beginnings. But Jack had taught her the truth. You're never too old for happiness, never too old to take risks, to chase dreams, to rebuild your life from the ground up. Age wasn't the limitation she'd thought it was. Fear was. And she'd finally learned to be brave. Spring arrived, painting the valley in wildflowers and new grass. Charlotte's school thrived, her students making remarkable progress. Jack's herd grew, their small ranch becoming increasingly profitable. And their love deepened with each passing day, roots growing stronger, branches reaching higher. One afternoon in April, Charlotte received a letter from Boston, from Thomas Ashford, of all people. Her hands shook as she opened it, old wounds threatening to resurface. The letter was brief. Thomas had heard about her marriage through mutual acquaintances. He wrote to congratulate her and to offer something she'd never expected, an apology. "I was cruel to you, Charlotte," he'd written. "I let my own fears about aging and mortality make me say terrible things to a woman who deserved only kindness. You told me you loved me, and I threw it back in your face because I was a coward. I've since married a woman my own age, and I'm miserable. She's young and pretty and entirely unsuitable for me. I find myself thinking of you often, remembering your intelligence, your passion, your warmth. I hope your young cowboy appreciates what he has. I clearly didn't." Charlotte read the letter twice, waiting for the old pain to resurface. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt only pity for Thomas, trapped in a marriage born of his own prejudices, and profound gratitude for the path that had led her here. She showed the letter to Jack that evening. He read it carefully, his expression darkening. "Want me to ride to Boston and punch him?" he offered, and Charlotte couldn't tell if he was joking. "No," she said, smiling. "I want you to help me burn it." They took the letter outside, touching a match to it and watching it curl into ash. As the flames consumed Thomas's words, his apology, his regrets, Charlotte felt the last remnants of her Boston shame finally release. "I used to think he ruined me," she said quietly, watching the fire. "That his rejection broke something in me that could never be fixed. But now I'm grateful to him." Jack's arm came around her shoulders. "Grateful? If he hadn't rejected me, I never would have come west, never would have been on that stagecoach, never would have met you." She turned to face her husband. "He didn't ruin me. He freed me. Freed me to find you, to find this life, to find myself." Jack kissed her forehead. "Then I should probably write him a thank you letter." Charlotte laughed, the sound echoing across their valley. "Don't you dare." Summer brought new developments. Mrs. Thornton convinced the Territorial Education Board to make Charlotte's position official, with a proper salary and recognition as a frontier teacher. Several families from even farther out began sending their children to her school, requiring an expansion of the schoolroom. Jack built it with help from neighbors, the community coming together to support education in their area. And Charlotte realized something wonderful. She was building exactly what she'd dreamed of. Not the life society said she should want, but the life she actually needed. A partnership with a man who saw her as an equal. Work that mattered and challenged her. A home that was truly hers. Respect earned through action, not granted by convention. On their first anniversary, Jack took Charlotte back to the spot where he'd proposed. The valley was lush with late summer growth, the creek running full and clear. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his saddlebag. Charlotte opened it to find a leather-bound journal, beautiful and clearly expensive. "Jack, it's lovely, but what's it for?" "I want you to write our story," he said. "Everything that happened, the stagecoach attack, the Daltons, fighting for your job, building this life. I want you to write it down so someday other women who think they're too old for happiness can read it and know they're wrong." Charlotte felt tears sting her eyes. "Other women?" "Women like you were when you arrived in Arizona, broken and scared and convinced their best years were behind them. I want them to read about Charlotte Whitmore, who came west at 35 and found love and adventure and everything she'd been told she was too old for. I want them to know it's never too late." Charlotte threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness, his understanding of what their story could mean. "I'll write it," she promised. "Every word." And she did. In the evenings, after teaching and chores and dinner, Charlotte would sit at their table and write. She chronicled their meeting in the desert, the instant connection, the obstacles they'd faced. She wrote about the school board meetings, Mrs. Thornton's transformation from opponent to ally, the Dalton attack. She wrote about love that defied expectations, about finding yourself when you'd thought you were already fully formed, about the courage it takes to choose happiness over propriety. Jack would read over her shoulder sometimes, making suggestions, adding details she'd forgotten. It became a project they shared, another way they built their life together. 2 years after their wedding, Charlotte was invited back to Tucson to give a talk at the annual Teachers Conference. She stood before a room full of educators, some young and fresh-faced, others weathered by years in the classroom, and told them about frontier education, about reaching underserved communities. But at the end, she added something personal. "I came to Arizona at 35 years old, convinced my life was essentially over. I'd been rejected, humiliated, told I was too old for romance or adventure or new beginnings, and I believed it. I carried that shame across 3,000 miles, thinking I was running to a new life, when really I was just hiding." She paused, finding Jack in the audience. He smiled at her, that same smile that had stolen her heart in the desert. "But then I met someone who refused to see my age as a limitation, who looked at me and saw strength and capability and worth. And slowly, I started to see it too. I learned that age is just a number, that it's never too late to take risks, to chase dreams, to build the life you actually want instead of the one you think you should have." Charlotte looked around at the faces watching her, some skeptical, some interested, some hungry for the hope she was offering. "So my advice to you as educators and as human beings is this. Don't let anyone tell you you're too old for anything that brings you joy. Don't let fear or convention or other people's expectations dictate how you live your life. Be brave. Be foolish. Be young at heart, no matter how many years you've lived. Because I promise you, The best parts of your life might still be ahead of you, waiting in the most unexpected places. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, several women approached her, women in their 30s, 40s, even 50s, who'd given up on certain dreams, certain possibilities. Charlotte talked with each one, sharing her story in more detail, encouraging them to believe that change was possible at any age. One woman, probably 45 with silver threading her dark hair, gripped Charlotte's hands tightly. "My husband died 2 years ago," she whispered, "and everyone keeps telling me I'm too old to find love again, that I should just focus on my teaching and accept my widowhood. But hearing you, maybe they're wrong. Maybe I'm not done yet." Charlotte squeezed her hands. "You're not done. Not unless you choose to be. And even if you never find love again, there are 1,000 other adventures waiting for you. You just have to be brave enough to reach for them." The woman left with tears in her eyes and hope on her face, and Charlotte felt a deep satisfaction. This was why Jack wanted her to write their story, to share it. Because their love wasn't just about them, it was proof that the rules society imposed were arbitrary, breakable, ultimately meaningless compared to genuine connection and courage. Years passed, and Charlotte's school became renowned throughout the territory. Children came from miles away to learn from the Boston teacher who'd chosen frontier life over civilization. Jack's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most respected operations in the region, and their love continued to grow and deepen, weathering challenges and celebrating triumphs together. On their 5th anniversary, Jack presented Charlotte with another gift, an addition to their home, specifically designed as a proper school building. Large windows for light, rows of desks he'd built himself, and a beautiful teacher's desk with a brass nameplate that read, "Mrs. Charlotte Calder, Educator." Charlotte wept when she saw it. "Jack, it's too much. The expense." "It's not too much. Nothing is too much for you." He pulled her close. "You've given me everything, Charlotte. A home, a purpose, a life worth living. Let me give you this. Let me give you the school you've always deserved." They stood together in the new schoolroom, sunlight streaming through the windows, and Charlotte marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From Boston's shame to Arizona's acceptance. From loneliness to partnership. From believing she was too old for happiness to building a life overflowing with it. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been on that stagecoach?" Jack asked quietly. "If the Daltons had attacked a different coach? If I'd been somewhere else that day?" Charlotte thought about it. "Sometimes. But then I remember something important. We would have found each other anyway. Maybe not that day, maybe not in the desert, but somehow, somewhere, we would have found each other. Some things are just meant to be." Jack smiled. "You believe in fate now? The logical Boston teacher believes in destiny?" "I believe in us," Charlotte corrected. "I believe that when two people are meant to be together, the universe conspires to make it happen. Our universe just happened to conspire through outlaw attacks and school board meetings and a whole lot of stubborn determination." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I love you, Charlotte Calder, my wise, wonderful wife." "I love you too, Jack Calder, my young, impossible, perfect husband." They kissed there in the new schoolroom, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd built together. And Charlotte thought about the girl she'd been in Boston, afraid, ashamed, convinced her best years were behind her. If she could go back and tell that woman what waited in her future, she wouldn't believe it. The idea that a 35-year-old school teacher would find adventure and passion and true partnership with a 25-year-old cowboy would have seemed like fantasy. But it was real as the desert sun and the valley wind and the love that filled every corner of their shared life. 10 years after their wedding, Charlotte stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the valley in impossible colors. She was 45 now, her hair more silver than brown, lines deepening around her eyes and mouth. Jack was 35, the age she'd been when they met, and still heartbreakingly handsome, though the years had added character to his features, a gravitas that only made him more attractive. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Charlotte leaned back into him. "I'm thinking about a scared woman who stepped off a stagecoach in this territory 10 years ago, who thought her life was over at 35, who believed all the lies about being too old for love and adventure." "What happened to her?" Charlotte smiled. She met a young cowboy with storm-gray eyes who refused to see her age, who looked past the number and saw the woman, who taught her that young and old are just states of mind, and the bravest thing you can do is choose happiness regardless of what anyone else thinks. Jack tightened his arms around her. Sounds like a smart cowboy. The smartest. Charlotte turned in his embrace to face him. You know what the best part is? After 10 years, you still look at me the same way you did in that desert, like I'm the most remarkable woman in the world. Because you are. Jack cupped her face in his hands, those hands that had pulled her from wreckage and built their home and held her through every challenge. And you'll still be remarkable at 55, at 65, at 85. Because age has nothing to do with who you are, Charlotte. It never did. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Charlotte kissed her husband and thought about the words that had changed her life. Words spoken in desperation during an outlaw attack, words that had become their truth. I'm too old for you, she'd whispered. Then let me be young enough for both of us, he'd answered. And he had been. But more importantly, he'd taught Charlotte to be young enough too. Young enough to take risks, to embrace change, to live fully and fearlessly and without apology. Their story, the one Charlotte had written in that leather journal, had been copied and shared throughout the territory. Other women read it and found courage to pursue their own happiness. Other couples defied convention, inspired by the Boston teacher and her cowboy who'd proven that love knew no age limits. But for Charlotte, the greatest gift wasn't the impact their story had on others. It was the life they'd built together. A life of partnership and respect and abiding love. A life that proved, beyond any doubt, that you're never too old to write a new chapter, to take a leap of faith, to find exactly what you've been looking for in the last place you'd thought to look. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Charlotte and Jack walked hand in hand into their home, into their life, into their future. A future that stretched ahead of them, bright and full of promise, because they'd had the courage to choose each other when the world said they shouldn't. And Charlotte Whitmore Calder, the woman who'd once thought 35 was too old for new beginnings, smiled at the beautiful truth she'd learned. It's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Never too late to find your place in the world. Never too late to love and be loved in return. All you need is courage, and someone brave enough to whisper, "Let me be young enough for both of us." The rest, as they say, is just the beginning.